It was just another quiet morning by the lake when Sam Harris checked his mailbox. The soft chirping of birds mixed with the rhythmic sound of the water lapping at the dock. He'd come to love the peaceful solitude of his lakeside home, a sanctuary he'd inherited from his grandfather. The boat he'd kept for years, a family heirloom passed down through generations, floated gently on the calm surface of the lake. It was more than a boat, it was a piece of family history, a reminder of simpler times, and a symbol of the bond he'd shared with his late grandfather. But today, as Sam reached for the lone envelope wedged in the box, something felt off. The envelope wasn't the usual bill or catalog, it was a thick, official-looking letter with the Homeowners Association's, HOA, logo stamped in bold letters on the front. His heart skipped a beat. Sam wasn't one to cause trouble, but the HOA had always been a shadow hanging over the community, especially for someone like him. A private man who kept to himself and avoided the drama of neighborhood politics. He turned the envelope over and tore it open, eager to know what it contained. As he read through the letter, his brow furrowed. It was a formal notice from the HOA, demanding that he remove his boat from the lake within 30 days. The letter was curt and gave no reason for the demand, only stating that the boat was in violation of unspecified community rules. Sam felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. He'd lived here for 5 years without a single complaint about the boat. His grandfather had always kept it there, and no one had ever batted an eye. So why now? Your boat violates HOA regulations regarding boats on the lake, the letter read. Failure to comply will result in fines and legal action. Sam stood there, staring at the paper in disbelief. The letter was vague, but the message was clear. He was being forced to remove his boat, something that had been on the lake for as long as he could remember. The mere thought of parting with it felt like an attack on his connection to his grandfather, to the very soul of the place he'd come to call home. But more than that, Sam felt a deep sense of injustice. The HOA had no right to dictate what he did with his property, and he wasn't about to let them push him around. As the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over the water, Sam's mind began to race. He knew he had to take action. He had to find out why the HOA was doing this, and more importantly, whether they had any legal right to tell him what to do with his boat. But there was something else, something deeper, that bothered him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a simple rule enforcement. Someone had to be behind this, pushing the HOA to make a move. But who? Why now? He muttered to himself. Why after all these years? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was Jake, his best friend, who lived a few miles away. Sam pressed the green button. Hey, Jake, Sam said, trying to sound casual, though his voice betrayed his frustration. Hey, man. What's up? You sound off, Jake replied. Sam sighed and leaned back against the mailbox, still holding the letter. I just got this letter from the HOA. They want me to move my boat off the lake. Can you believe that? There was a pause on the other end of the line before Jake spoke again, his voice calm but curious. What? Why? That's the thing. They don't say why. Just that it's against some rule. It doesn't make sense, man. I've had that boat out there for years. Jake's voice softened. Well, maybe they're just cracking down on something. You know how they are. But you can't just ignore them, Sam. You'll get hit with fines, maybe worse. I'm not just gonna roll over, Sam snapped, his anger flaring. This is my property, and I'm not going to let them dictate what I do with it. You've got a point, Jake said, his tone thoughtful. But you're gonna need more than just a stubborn attitude to beat them. You might need some legal advice. Sam's mind raced. Legal advice. He hadn't even considered that. But Jake was right. The HOA had power, and if they were serious about this, he needed to know his rights. The boat wasn't just a piece of wood on the water, it was a part of his heritage. He wasn't about to let it go without a fight. "I'll figure this out," Sam said, his voice firmer now. "I'm going down to the HOA office this afternoon. I'll get some answers." "Good luck with that," Jake replied with a chuckle. "Let me know if you need anything." Sam hung up the phone, his mind still spinning. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. This wasn't just about the boat. It was about his right to live the way he wanted in his own home. The HOA had no business telling him what to do with his property. They were just a group of people who thought they could control everyone, and Sam wasn't going to stand for it. He looked out at the lake, his eyes narrowing as he saw his boat floating peacefully in the water. It had been there for generations. His grandfather had taken him fishing on it when he was a boy. It was more than just a boat, it was a symbol of family, of heritage, of everything that made this place his home. He looked out at the lake, his eyes narrowing as he saw his boat floating peacefully in the water. It had been there for generations. His grandfather had taken him fishing on it when he was a boy. It was more than just a boat, it was a symbol of family, of heritage, of everything that made this place his home. Sam knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to let the HOA take that away from him. He would fight for his boat, for his right to live how he chose, and for the legacy of his family. This was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sam Harris stood at the window of his lakeside home, staring out at the shimmering water that stretched out in front of him. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the surface of the lake, and for a moment, he allowed himself to sink into the tranquility of the scene. The boat, the one the HOA had just ordered him to move, bobbed gently at the dock. It had been there for as long as he could remember, a constant presence in his life. But as he gazed at it now, he felt something more than nostalgia. He felt a growing sense of injustice, as if this boat, this place, was being threatened. The place where he had found peace, solace, and meaning, everything he had worked for, was now under attack. He turned away from the window and sat on the old leather chair by the fireplace, his thoughts drifting back to the past. To the years before the lake had become his sanctuary. It wasn't always this quiet. Life hadn't always been so simple. Sam's father, John Harris, was a successful businessman, and the family had always lived a comfortable, predictable life. But when Sam was just 12 years old, John's sudden death from a heart attack left a hole in the family's foundation. His mother, Karen, was left to raise him and his two younger sisters on her own. The stability that Sam had known vanished overnight, and he quickly learned to adapt. But it was his grandfather, George Harris, who became his rock in those uncertain years. George had been an old-fashioned man, stern but kind. He didn't say much, but his actions spoke volumes. It was George who had taken Sam fishing every summer, who had taught him the importance of hard work and patience, and, most importantly, who had shown him the value of holding on to what mattered most. George had built the house by the lake with his own two hands, and he had passed down the boat to Sam after his death, a symbol of the continuity of the family's legacy. Sam had always felt a sense of pride in his family's history, in the house his grandfather had built and the life they had created on the lake. He never imagined he would one day be forced to defend it against people like the HOA. They had no idea what the lake meant to him, to his family. To them, it was just a piece of property. But to Sam, it was home. His relationship with the lake wasn't just about the boat. It was about the memories it held, the countless summers spent fishing, the quiet moments sitting on the dock, watching the world go by, the times when he could escape from the pressures of life and just breathe. It was about the legacy his grandfather had left behind, and the sense of continuity that Sam clung to when the world outside felt chaotic and uncertain. Sam had moved into the house 5 years ago after a difficult breakup. He needed a fresh start, and the house on the lake offered him the solitude and space he needed to heal. It wasn't just about getting away from the memories of his ex-girlfriend, it was about finding a place where he could reconnect with himself. It was where he could think, reflect, and rebuild. But even here, on his peaceful lake, he had never escaped the pull of external pressures. The HOA had always been a looming presence, sending out endless rules and regulations that seemed to cover every aspect of life in the neighborhood. No loud parties. No excessive lawn decorations. And, of course, no boats on the lake that weren't approved by the committee. Sam had always followed the rules to avoid trouble, but the letter he'd received today felt different. It felt like a personal attack on everything he held dear. He picked up the letter from the HOA again, his eyes scanning it for the 100th time. He felt the blood rising to his cheeks, a mix of frustration and disbelief. Why now? Why after all these years? The boat had never been a problem before. His neighbors knew him as a quiet guy who kept to himself, someone who minded his own business. And yet, someone in the HOA had decided to target him. As Sam sat there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from his sister, Emily. Emily, hey Sam, how's the lake life going? Did you get that letter from the HOA? Sam smiled despite himself. Emily was always the optimistic one, always reaching out even when they weren't on the best of terms. She'd been the one to encourage him to move back to the lake after the breakup, reminding him of the good memories with their grandfather. Sam typed back a quick reply. Sam, yeah, got it today. They want me to move the boat. Can you believe that? A few seconds later, Emily's response came through. Emily, what? That's crazy. You've had that boat out there for years. Let me know if you need help with anything. I'm sure this can be worked out. Her words were comforting, but Sam knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The HOA wasn't going to just back down because his sister thought it was unfair. If anything, they would likely see her involvement as another reason to dig their heels in deeper. Sam's mind wandered back to the day his grandfather had passed away. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air felt sharp in your lungs and the sun struggled to break through the fog. Sam had been in high school at the time, barely 16, when he'd gotten the call. His grandfather had been battling illness for months, but Sam hadn't been ready to lose him. Not like this. George had been more than just a grandfather. He had been a mentor, a guide, and, in many ways, the father figure Sam had never had. When Sam had inherited the house and the boat, he had promised to take care of both, to honor George's memory. That promise still echoed in his mind, even now. As Sam thought about the letter in his hand, he felt a familiar ache in his chest. It wasn't just about a boat. It wasn't just about property rights or HOA regulations. It was about everything his grandfather had taught him. The value of standing up for what you believe in, the importance of family, and the strength to fight for what's yours. And that's exactly what Sam was going to do. He wasn't going to let the HOA, whoever they were, bully him into giving up the one thing that meant so much. This was more than just a dispute over a boat. This was about his family, his history, and his right to live in peace. He stood up, took a deep breath, and headed for the door. Tomorrow, he would go to the HOA office. Tomorrow, he would find out exactly who was behind this, and why they thought they had the right to take his boat. But for now, he would sleep on it, letting the weight of the situation settle in. One thing was certain, this wasn't going to be the last he'd hear from the HOA. The next morning, Sam woke up early, his mind already racing. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the cool morning air kissed his skin as he stepped outside onto the porch. The lake was still and silent, almost as if the water was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Sam knew today was going to be the day that everything would change. He had to find out who had decided to challenge him and why. He grabbed his coffee from the kitchen, sipping it slowly as he took in the view from his porch. The house, his grandfather's house, had always felt like a safe haven, a place where he could shut out the world. But lately, it felt more like a battleground. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trying to push him out, to take away the one thing that had always belonged to him. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. Emily, you going to the HOA office today? Sam set the coffee cup down on the porch railing and tapped out a response. Sam, yeah. I'm going to find out who's behind this. They can't just tell me to move my boat without a reason. Emily, let me know how it goes. You've got this, Sam. Stay calm, okay? He chuckled softly at her message. Emily was always the optimist, always trying to make him feel better, even when the situation seemed impossible. Sam appreciated it, but he wasn't sure if calm was something he could manage. Not today. After another long sip of coffee, Sam grabbed his jacket and headed for the car. The HOA office wasn't far, just a 15-minute drive into town, but as he drove, his thoughts kept drifting back to the letter, to the boat, and to the injustice he felt. The office was a small, unassuming building in the middle of a row of businesses. A faded sign reading Lakeview Heights Homeowners Association hung above the door, and Sam could see through the window that the lights were already on. As he parked his car, he noticed a few people milling about inside, their faces serious and focused. He didn't recognize any of them. Sam walked up to the door, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The air inside the office smelled like stale paper and coffee. A woman in her mid-40s sat behind a desk near the door, her eyes focused on the computer screen. She didn't look up as Sam approached, but he didn't need her to. He was here for one thing, answers. Excuse me, Sam said, his voice steady but firm. The woman glanced up, her face neutral. Can I help you? I received a letter about my boat, Sam began. I need to speak to whoever sent it. I'm not going to just move it without understanding why. The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly unfazed by his tone. She glanced down at a folder on her desk. I'm afraid you'll need to speak to Ms. Miller. She's the one handling your case. Ms. Miller? Sam repeated, his heart sinking. He had heard that name before. Not in a good way. She was one of the more powerful members of the HOA board, known for being a stickler about rules and regulations. She had always been a force to be reckoned with, and Sam knew this wasn't going to be easy. Yes, she's in the back office. Let me see if she's available. Sam nodded, his mind already bracing for the confrontation. The woman on the phone had seemed dismissive of his concerns, and he feared that Ms. Miller would be no different. The boat, his family's boat, was more than just a piece of property. It was part of his life, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it from him. He followed the woman through the narrow hallway to a small office at the back. She knocked twice before opening the door. Ms. Miller, this is Mr. Harris. He's here about the boat on the lake, the woman said, her tone polite but curt. A sharp voice from inside answered. Send him in. Sam stepped into the room, and his eyes immediately locked onto the woman sitting behind the desk. Ms. Miller was in her late 50s, her short-cropped gray hair and sharp eyes making her appear both intimidating and in control. She didn't smile or offer a greeting. Instead, she motioned for Sam to sit in the chair across from her. Mr. Harris, she said, her voice smooth and professional. I assume you're here about the boat. That's right, Sam said, his tone already cold. I received a letter demanding that I remove it from the lake. I've had that boat there for years, and I'm not about to move it without a good reason. So tell me why this is happening. Ms. Miller folded her hands in front of her, her eyes never leaving Sam. The HOA has rules about boat storage. The boat you have on the lake doesn't meet those regulations. It's been flagged in multiple complaints from neighbors. Complaints? Sam repeated, his voice rising. I've never received any complaints. No one's ever said anything to me about it. I've had that boat there for years, and no one's ever cared before. Ms. Miller's eyes hardened. There's a reason for that. Most people don't complain about things like this unless they have a reason to. And while you may not have heard anything, there have been issues. The boat is in violation of zoning laws, which were put in place to protect the integrity of this community. Sam felt a surge of anger and frustration. Zoning laws? You're telling me my boat is somehow ruining the integrity of the community? That's absurd. I'm simply enforcing the rules, Mr. Harris, she replied, her tone icy. The board has made it clear that we need to crack down on certain violations, and your boat happens to be one of them. If you don't comply, you will face fines. If you still refuse, further action will be taken. Sam leaned forward, his voice low but firm. You don't get it, do you? This boat is part of my family's legacy. It's not just a boat. It's a connection to my grandfather, to my past. You're not just taking away a piece of wood, you're taking away something that means everything to me. Ms. Miller's expression didn't change. I understand the sentiment, Mr. Harris. But the rules are clear. You have 30 days to move the boat, or we will take further steps. Sam stood up abruptly, his anger boiling over. You're not taking it from me. I'll fight this. I'll fight you and your board if I have to. Ms. Miller's gaze remained steady, unflinching. That's your choice. But I'll remind you that the HOA has the authority to make these decisions. You might want to think about how far you're willing to push this. Sam didn't respond. He turned and walked out of the office, his hands clenched into fists. This wasn't over. Far from it. But as he stepped back into the bright sunlight, he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't backing down. The fight for his boat had just begun. The drive back from the HOA office felt like a blur to Sam. His mind was a whirlwind of frustration, anger, and disbelief. He could still feel the tension in the air in Ms. Miller's office, her cold demeanor, the unwavering way she had laid out the rules as if they were carved in stone. Sam wasn't sure what had hurt more, the fact that the HOA was targeting him, or that they didn't seem to care about the personal history tied to that boat. He pulled into his driveway and parked, the boat at the dock just beyond his front door. It loomed there like a silent sentinel, as if it too was waiting for the inevitable conflict to come. Sam sat in the car for a moment, staring out at the lake. The water was still, mirroring the sky above. He had inherited not just the boat, but this entire place, the memories tied to every inch of land. His grandfather's spirit felt alive in the trees, in the air, and in the boat itself. But that was all at risk now. He needed a plan. Sam's first instinct was to fight the HOA head-on. But as he walked back into the house, he realized that would be a mistake if he didn't have the right strategy. The last thing he wanted was to escalate things in a way that would cost him more than the boat. There was a fine line between standing your ground and making an enemy of an entire community. But Sam wasn't one to back down from a challenge, especially not when it came to something that had meant so much to him for so long. He needed allies. He reached for his phone and dialed Emily's number. She picked up on the first ring. "Hey, how'd it go?" Emily asked, her voice bright but laced with concern. Sam let out a breath, rubbing his forehead. "It didn't go great. Ms. Miller gave me an ultimatum. Move the boat in 30 days or face fines, and possibly more. She's acting like it's just another violation to be dealt with, but to me, it's personal." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I knew it wouldn't be easy. But listen, you can't just roll over. We can figure this out. Have you talked to anyone else in the neighborhood?" Sam sat down at the kitchen table, his thoughts racing. "I haven't. But it's clear they're doing this because someone's been complaining about the boat. I need to know who. I need to know who's behind all this, Emily." "You're right," Emily said, her voice firm with resolve. "But you're not alone in this. We can get to the bottom of it. I'll reach out to a few people and see what I can find out. Maybe there are others in the neighborhood who feel the same way. Who knows? We might even have some legal recourse if the HOA's overstepping." "I'm counting on you," Sam replied, a sense of relief starting to wash over him. Emily had always been the one to help him see things more clearly, to find a way through even when it seemed impossible. If anyone could help him figure this out, it was her. The conversation shifted to logistics, and Sam agreed to meet Emily later that afternoon at a cafe in town to talk strategy. But as he hung up, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something bigger. Something that might unravel everything he had worked so hard to protect. Later that day, Sam met Emily at the cafe. The small town diner was bustling with activity, the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation filling the air. Emily was already seated at a corner table, tapping away at her phone. She looked up when Sam entered, giving him a reassuring smile. "I've been doing some digging," she said as Sam sat down. "There are definitely people in the neighborhood who aren't happy about the boat. A few of them are even pretty vocal about the HOA's enforcement of the rules." "Who?" Sam asked, leaning in. Emily scrolled through her phone before looking back up at him. "I talked to Kathy Fields, she's in her 60s, been in the neighborhood forever. She said there's a small group of people who've been pushing for stricter enforcement of the lake rules for a while. Some of them are worried about the aesthetics of the neighborhood, and others are just nosy. Sounds like they've been trying to find a reason to go after me," Sam muttered, frustrated. Emily nodded. "Exactly. Kathy mentioned that Ms. Miller has always been a hardliner when it comes to enforcing these kinds of rules. But here's the kicker, Kathy's not the only one who's upset. There are a few others who think the HOA is getting too overbearing. And I'm betting they won't mind joining you if you decide to push back." Sam sat back, considering the information. "So, there are people who feel the same way. That's good. But I still don't know who made the actual complaint about the boat. Do you think Kathy knows?" "Maybe. She didn't mention any names, but she did say that there's been some tension between the HOA and a few of the newer homeowners who don't like the bold ways. Sounds like someone might have just had it out for you." Sam sighed. "I wouldn't put it past someone like Ms. Miller to turn a personal vendetta into a full-blown HOA initiative." Emily looked thoughtful for a moment. "Well, here's my suggestion. We don't go in blind. We need to gather more information. Let's talk to some of the other neighbors who are still on our side, and see if anyone has any insight into who might have started this. We also need to research the zoning laws and any HOA regulations to see if they've been changed recently." Sam nodded, his determination rising again. "All right, we'll play this smart. We'll get our facts in order and take this one step at a time. But I'm not backing down. I'll fight them." "Good," Emily said with a grin. "And when you're ready to take them on, I'll be right there beside you. Let's make sure we do this the right way." After their meeting, Sam felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had a plan, and he wasn't going to let the HOA, or anyone else, take away his grandfather's legacy without a fight. The journey ahead would be difficult, but he was ready for it. He spent the next few days doing his research, poring over the zoning laws, and digging through old documents about the HOA's rules and regulations. Emily had already spoken to a few of the neighbors, and it seemed like they were beginning to rally behind him, ready to take a stand as well. But there was still one thing left to figure out: who had made the complaint about his boat. Until Sam found out who that was, he couldn't move forward with full confidence. But as he sat on the porch, watching the boat at the dock once more, he knew one thing: whatever came next, he wasn't going to lose. Not this time. Sam sat at his desk, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. The weight of the situation was beginning to sink in. He had spent the past several days gathering information, reaching out to neighbors, and researching every zoning law and HOA regulation he could find. Emily had been instrumental in connecting him with a handful of neighbors who shared his concerns about the increasing overreach of the HOA. They were all ready to stand with him, but there was still one glaring issue: he had no idea who had filed the complaint about his boat. It was time to find out. Sam had a list of potential suspects. There were a few newer homeowners in the area, people who didn't understand the history of the lake or the significance of his family's boat. But it was hard to believe that anyone who had lived here long enough would go after him for something as trivial as a boat. His mind kept returning to Ms. Miller, how cold and calculating she had been during their meeting, like she was waiting for him to push back so she could crush him with the full weight of the HOA's power. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Emily. "Emily, got some news. You might want to sit down." Sam's heart skipped a beat. His fingers trembled slightly as he typed his response. "Sam, what happened?" "Emily, I found out who made the complaint." Sam leaned back in his chair, his breath catching in his throat. This was the moment. The piece of the puzzle that would complete the picture. He couldn't help but feel a sense of dread wash over him, unsure of whether this news would be the final blow or his chance to turn the tide. "Sam, who was it?" There was a long pause before Emily replied. "Emily, it was Robert Miller." Sam blinked, reading the message again, making sure he hadn't misinterpreted it. Robert Miller. That name felt like a punch to the gut. Robert Miller was Ms. Miller's husband, and he was no ordinary resident of Lakeview Heights. Robert had been living in the neighborhood for nearly 2 decades, and he was well known for his meticulous attention to the neighborhood's rules and his endless desire to make the community conform to his image of perfection. The man was a stickler for detail, and he had made it his personal mission to ensure that every yard was pristine, every fence painted to exact specifications, and every boat was perfectly in line with the HOA's regulations. But the idea that Robert Miller had gone out of his way to complain about Sam's boat was something Sam hadn't expected. The boat had been in the lake for generations, passed down from his grandfather. It was more than just a vessel, it was a piece of family history, something that connected him to the past in ways that no HOA rule ever could. And yet, Robert Miller, of all people, had taken it upon himself to file a complaint. The more Sam thought about it, the more it made sense. Robert had always been a vocal critic of anything that deviated from his narrow view of what was appropriate for the community. And the boat? It was an eyesore to him. It didn't fit with his perfect vision of what the neighborhood should look like. Sam's stomach twisted with anger. He stood up from the desk, his hands shaking. He needed answers, but more than that, he needed to confront this head-on. He wasn't going to let Robert Miller, or anyone else, tear down his family's legacy without a fight. Sam immediately dialed Emily. "Emily, I just found out who made the complaint," he said, his voice low and tight with rage. "It was Robert Miller. His wife is the one running the HOA, and now I know exactly why they've been targeting me." Emily's voice was sharp with surprise. "Robert Miller? Are you sure? That's unexpected. But it does make sense. He's been a thorn in the side of anyone who doesn't fit into his idea of perfection. But this is big, Sam. You need to be careful. The Millers are influential." "I don't care about that," Sam snapped. "This is about more than just a boat. This is personal. And I'm not backing down." There was a pause on the other end. Emily let out a slow breath. "Okay, I get it. But we need to be smart about this. Robert Miller won't back down easily, and neither will his wife. If we go in all guns blazing, it could make things worse for you. We need a strategy. We need to find a way to take him down without making ourselves the enemy of the entire neighborhood." Sam clenched his fists, feeling the rage bubble up inside him. He was angry, yes. But deep down, he knew Emily was right. He couldn't just charge in without a plan. He had to outsmart them, expose the hypocrisy, and turn the community against Robert Miller, if possible. "I'll do whatever it takes," Sam said, his voice steady now. "I need you to dig deeper. Find out what you can about Robert Miller, about any shady dealings he's been involved in with the HOA. If he's been this vocal about enforcing the rules, there has to be something that slipped through the cracks. Something that will give us leverage." "I'm on it," Emily replied, her tone resolute. But you need to lay low for now. Don't give them any more reason to come after you. Sam's jaw tightened. I'll lay low. But they'll see me eventually. And when they do, I'll be ready. As he hung up the phone, the weight of everything suddenly hit him. The fight he was about to embark on wasn't just about a boat, it was about standing up to the forces that were trying to control his life, to push him out of the community that had meant everything to him. But more than that, it was about standing up for his family, for his grandfather's legacy, and for the memory of a life that had shaped who he was today. He wasn't going to let Robert Miller, or anyone, take that away from him. The morning after discovering Robert Miller's involvement in the complaint, Sam felt a mixture of determination and anxiety. He sat at his kitchen table, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the lake. His eyes drifted over the water, the gentle ripples a stark contrast to the storm of emotions brewing inside him. His grandfather's boat, still docked at the far end of the lake, seemed to stand as a quiet sentinel, a reminder of all that was at stake. Sam had spent the night going over every detail of the situation. Robert Miller, the ever-diligent stickler for rules, had decided to target him and his boat, something so deeply ingrained in his family's history that it felt like a personal attack. As much as he tried to stay calm, the injustice of it all gnawed at him. His grandfather had built that boat from scratch, piece by piece, and it had been passed down through generations. It wasn't just wood and metal, it was a piece of his heritage, his family's story. And now Robert Miller had decided that it didn't belong, that it was an eyesore, something that had to be removed for the sake of community standards. Sam clenched his fists, but he knew he couldn't let his anger control him. He had to be strategic. It wasn't just about protecting the boat, it was about taking a stand for everything that had come before him. He wasn't going to let Robert Miller rewrite the history of the lake, nor was he going to let an HOA dictate his life. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was Emily. Emily, I've got some updates. I need to talk to you. Sam's heart quickened. What did you find out? Emily, I've been digging around, and I've got a few things that could be useful. But we need to meet in person. Sam's mind raced. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Sam arrived at the local diner, he found Emily sitting at a corner booth, her expression serious. She wasn't wasting any time, he could tell. Sit down, she said, nodding toward the seat across from her. I've got some information that might turn this whole thing around. Sam slid into the booth, leaning forward, his interest piqued. What did you find? Emily's voice dropped to a whisper, as if the information she was about to share had the potential to change everything. Robert Miller's been involved in some shady dealings with the HOA before. I've spoken to a few people in the neighborhood who've worked with him, and it turns out he's used his position to push through rules that benefit him, especially when it comes to property values. He's got a vested interest in making sure the neighborhood stays picture perfect. And his wife, well, she's the enforcer of those rules. Sam's mind raced. What kind of shady dealings? Emily's eyes darted around, checking to make sure no one was listening. He's been using his influence to buy up properties in the neighborhood at a lower price, then using his power to increase the value of those properties by making people adhere to stricter standards. He's basically inflating the value of the homes that he owns, pushing others out. Sam's blood ran cold. It made sense now. Robert wasn't just some uptight neighbor, he was a manipulator, using the HOA's power to line his own pockets. And Sam, with his beloved boat, was a threat to that scheme. If the boat stayed on the lake, it would mess with the carefully curated image Robert had worked so hard to build. This is bigger than I thought, Sam muttered. It's not just about my boat. He's been using the HOA to make himself richer. Emily nodded grimly. Exactly. And that's why we have to be careful. If we go in all guns blazing, we could be playing right into his hands. But if we approach this the right way, we can expose him for what he's really doing. Sam's thoughts were spinning. Emily was right, they had to play this carefully. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. If he was going to confront Robert Miller and the HOA, he needed solid evidence, a way to show the community just how corrupt this system had become. "So, what's the next step?" Sam asked, his voice determined. "We gather more evidence," Emily replied. "I'll talk to more neighbors, see if anyone has more dirt on Robert. We need a paper trail, something concrete that we can take to the authorities or, if it comes to that, the press." Sam nodded, understanding the gravity of what Emily was suggesting. They weren't just fighting to keep his boat on the lake anymore. They were fighting to expose a system of corruption that had taken root in their community. This was about more than just a battle with the HOA, it was a fight for the future of Lakeview Heights, for the people who still believed in preserving its history, its values, and its way of life. As they finished their conversation, Emily left Sam with one last piece of advice. "You need to lay low for now, Sam. Keep your head down. Don't give Robert any more ammunition. We'll make our move when we have all the pieces." Sam watched as Emily left the diner, her silhouette disappearing into the parking lot. For the first time since the HOA's threats began, he felt a flicker of hope. They were on to something. The more they dug, the more they were uncovering. And he wasn't going to let Robert Miller or anyone else take away his family's legacy. As he walked back to his car, Sam glanced once more at the lake. The boat was still there, a symbol of everything he had to protect. He wasn't sure how the fight would end, but he was certain of one thing, he wasn't going down without a fight. The days that followed were filled with a flurry of activity, but they were quiet ones. Sam kept his head down, his focus narrowed to the task at hand. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes, not with Robert Miller watching from the shadows, ready to pounce at the first sign of weakness. Emily's advice to lay low felt like the best course of action, but it was harder than he'd anticipated. The weight of the situation seemed to press down on him with every passing hour. It wasn't just his boat on the line anymore, it was the entire integrity of the neighborhood he had grown up in. The HOA, with its inflated sense of power, had become a force that no one dared challenge. Until now. Sam had spent countless hours going over the research Emily had gathered. He knew that to truly take down Robert Miller and the corrupt system he had set up, they needed more than just whispers from disgruntled neighbors. They needed solid evidence, something undeniable that would expose the depths of Robert's manipulation and bring the HOA to its knees. And it was starting to look like that evidence was just within reach. It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon when Emily called. Sam was in his garage, tinkering with a small boat motor, trying to distract himself from the overwhelming pressure of it all. His phone buzzed on the workbench, and he grabbed it without hesitation. "Emily, I've got something big. Meet me at the diner in an hour. This could be the break we've been waiting for." The sense of urgency in her message sent a jolt through Sam's body. His mind raced as he wiped his hands on a rag and grabbed his coat. Big was an understatement. He knew that Emily had been digging relentlessly for the last few days, trying to uncover any shred of proof that would confirm Robert Miller's shady dealings. But this felt like it was more than just gossip. When Sam arrived at the diner, Emily was already there, sitting at their usual booth, her laptop open in front of her. She looked up as he approached, a grim smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "This is it," Emily said without wasting time. "I found the smoking gun." Sam slid into the booth, his pulse quickening. "What did you find?" Emily clicked open a folder on her laptop and pushed it toward him. "This," she said simply, "is a set of emails between Robert Miller and several real estate developers in the area. I've been able to trace them back to transactions that occurred under the radar, all of them benefiting Robert in one way or another. These developers were in cahoots with him, inflating property values and manipulating the HOA's rules to push out homeowners who didn't conform to his idea of a perfect neighborhood." Sam's eyes scanned the screen, reading through the emails with mounting disbelief. The conversations were clear. Robert Miller had been leveraging his position as a key figure in the HOA to manipulate the market, purchasing properties at a steep discount, using the HOA's influence to enforce rules that would drive up the value of his own holdings. And what made it worse was that the HOA board members were complicit, some of them were even receiving financial kickbacks from the developers. Sam felt a chill run down his spine. "This is huge," he said, his voice tight. "This could bring down the whole HOA." Emily nodded. "Exactly. But we need to make sure this information doesn't get leaked before we're ready. If Robert finds out we have this, he'll shut us down before we can do anything about it." Sam ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts racing. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, the moment that could finally turn the tables on Robert Miller and his cronies. But they couldn't afford to rush. They had to be careful, every step had to be calculated. "Okay, so what now?" Sam asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "We need to get this into the right hands," Emily said, her expression serious. "We can't go to the authorities just yet, we don't have enough to guarantee that they'll take action. But we do have a few options. We could approach the media, get this information into the press. Or we could leverage it with the HOA itself, use it as a bargaining chip to force them to investigate Robert Miller and the rest of the board. If we go public, it's a risk, but it could also expose everything." Sam weighed his options. The thought of going to the press was tempting, but he knew that once the story hit the media, there would be no turning back. It would be a public battle, one that could destroy the reputation of the entire neighborhood. And while that might be satisfying on some level, it could also rally the HOA's supporters against him. "We need to be strategic," Sam said slowly. "I don't want to start a war that we can't finish. Let's take this to the board first. If we can make them see the truth without causing an all-out confrontation, maybe we can push them into action." Emily's eyes lit up. "I like that idea. It's bold, but it's controlled. We take the high ground and give the HOA one last chance to clean up its act. If they refuse, then we go public, and Robert Miller's whole empire comes crumbling down." Sam took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about everyone in Lakeview Heights who had been unknowingly manipulated and controlled. This was about restoring balance, about holding the corrupt accountable. "We do this right," Sam said, his voice resolute. "We give them the chance to do the right thing. But if they don't, we're going after them with everything we've got." Emily gave him a nod of approval. "You got it, Sam. I'll get the evidence together, and we'll plan our move." As Sam stood up from the booth, the weight of their mission settled on him like never before. They were on the cusp of something that could change everything for Lakeview Heights. But he knew this was just the beginning of a long, hard road. And he was ready to fight for what was right, no matter what it took. The day of the meeting arrived faster than Sam had expected. His nerves were on edge, but he kept his composure. Emily had spent the last 2 days gathering all the evidence they could find, Robert Miller's emails, the shady real estate deals, the questionable actions of the HOA board members, and now it was time to present it all. The stakes were higher than ever. If they did this right, they could expose the corruption that had been festering beneath the surface for years. If they made one wrong move, they could be shut down before they had a chance to take a breath. The HOA meeting was scheduled to take place at the community center, the same place where all neighborhood issues were debated and resolved, or, more often than not, swept under the rug. Sam had attended these meetings countless times over the years, usually just sitting quietly in the back while the board made decisions that never seemed to consider the interests of the actual homeowners. Today, however, he wasn't just a passive observer. Today, he was going to make sure the truth was heard. As he drove toward the community center, his thoughts raced. He could still hear Robert Miller's voice in his head, the man who had once seemed so respectable but was now the face of corruption. Miller had built a fortress of rules, regulations, and hidden agendas, and Sam knew it was time to tear it all down. When Sam arrived, the parking lot was already full. The room inside was buzzing with the usual noise of neighbors catching up, gossiping about the latest drama in the community, and discussing mundane concerns like lawn maintenance and pool hours. It was business as usual. But Sam could feel the tension in the air. The meeting hadn't even started, and already he could sense the weight of what was about to unfold. Emily was waiting for him by the entrance, her expression determined but anxious. She had always been the level-headed one between them, but even she was feeling the gravity of the situation. "You ready for this?" she asked, her voice low. Sam gave her a tight smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." They walked into the large meeting hall together. A long table at the front of the room was lined with the HOA board members, their faces grim and unfriendly. Robert Miller was sitting in the center, as expected, his cold eyes already scanning Sam as he took a seat toward the back of the room. There was no doubt in Sam's mind that Miller knew this meeting was going to be different. The man didn't have a poker face, but his attempt at maintaining composure was evident. The meeting began with the usual small talk, a few reports on neighborhood activities, and updates about upcoming community events. Sam sat quietly, waiting for the right moment. The longer he sat there, the more his frustration grew. This wasn't just a regular meeting, it was a chance to expose the lies that had been buried beneath the surface for far too long. Finally, after what felt like hours, the board moved to the next agenda item, community violations and concerns. That was Sam's cue. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood up, the room falling silent. Everyone knew Sam. He had been a fixture of the neighborhood for years. But today, he wasn't just speaking up about a trivial violation or a complaint. Today, he had a purpose. "Excuse me," Sam said, his voice steady despite the nerves. "I'd like to address a concern that has come to my attention regarding the HOA's involvement in the manipulation of property values in the neighborhood." The room grew quiet, and Sam could feel the eyes of the board members on him. Robert Miller shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening, but Sam pushed forward. "I've been investigating some activities that have taken place over the past few months," Sam continued. "And I've come across several pieces of evidence that suggest the HOA has been used as a tool for personal gain, by Robert Miller, specifically." There were gasps from the crowd, and Sam could see the panic in Robert's eyes. He wasn't the only one caught off guard. Several board members looked around at each other, clearly unaware of what Sam was about to reveal. "I have emails, real estate transactions, and other documents that show Robert Miller has been using his position within the HOA to manipulate property values, pushing people out of their homes so that he and a group of developers can profit," Sam said, his voice growing more confident with each word. Emily stood up beside him, sliding a folder full of documents across the table for everyone to see. The board members began flipping through the papers, their expressions growing more shocked with each passing second. Sam didn't give them a chance to respond. He had prepared for this moment too long to let them derail him. Robert Miller has used his influence to raise property values in the neighborhood at the expense of homeowners, driving prices up so that people like him can buy properties at a fraction of their value, Sam continued. And he's done this by manipulating the very rules that were meant to protect this community. It's not just unethical, it's illegal. The room was silent. Even Robert Miller, for the first time since Sam had started speaking, appeared to be at a loss for words. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. One of the board members, an older woman with glasses, spoke up. "This is a serious accusation, Mr. Turner. Do you have proof of these claims?" Sam nodded. "I've already given you the evidence. But if you need more, we can provide it. This is a corruption that goes all the way to the top. And I'm here today to make sure that the community knows what's been happening behind closed doors." There was a long pause as the board members exchanged looks. Sam could see that they were scrambling for a way to regain control of the situation. But it was too late. The truth was out in the open. Finally, Robert Miller stood up, his face reddened with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about, Turner," he spat. "These are lies. I've done nothing wrong. You're trying to ruin me, ruin this entire community." For your own selfish reasons. But Sam didn't flinch. The truth speaks for itself, Robert, he said firmly. And it's only a matter of time before everyone else sees it too. The meeting room erupted into chaos. Board members shouted over each other, their voices rising in protest, disbelief, and anger. The community members who had gathered to watch seemed equally divided, some appeared shocked, others suspicious, while a few of Robert Miller's most loyal followers took to defending him immediately. You can't just throw accusations like that without proof, one board member barked, slamming his fist on the table. That's not true, another board member yelled, his face turning crimson. We've worked hard to make this community better. There's no conspiracy. Sam stood at the front of the room, his hands steady on the edge of the table as he met their eyes. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. This was the moment he had prepared for. The storm was here, but he wouldn't let it consume him. Robert Miller, meanwhile, was livid. His face was an unreadable mask of fury. He had always prided himself on controlling the room, on making sure no one could ever challenge his authority. But this was different. The walls he had carefully built around himself were crumbling, and for the first time, Sam could see the fear in his eyes. You're lying. Robert shouted, standing up abruptly. I've built this community. Everything I've done is for the good of the people. You don't understand what you're dealing with. But Sam wasn't intimidated. The truth was on his side, and he wasn't backing down. We understand exactly what we're dealing with, Robert, Sam said calmly. We've got the proof, and we're not going anywhere until you're held accountable for what you've done. For a moment, it seemed as if Robert might snap, but instead, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. The room was filled with stunned silence as the noise died down. The board members were visibly shaken, their authority questioned for the first time in years. Emily stood beside Sam, her hand resting on his arm. This is just the beginning, she whispered. The real battle is only starting. Sam nodded, but his heart was pounding in his chest. He had never imagined it would unfold like this. He had expected a fight, but he hadn't anticipated the intensity, the shockwaves that would ripple through the community in the wake of his revelation. It didn't take long for the whispers to spread through the neighborhood. By the time Sam returned home that evening, he could already see the signs of division. His phone was filled with messages from neighbors, some of them offering support, others questioning his motives. Some asked for clarification on the evidence he presented, while others expressed doubt, unwilling to believe the accusations against someone as powerful as Robert Miller. The next morning, Sam went to his boat, his sanctuary. He needed to think. He needed to ground himself before everything spiraled out of control. But the peaceful stillness of the lake wasn't enough to quiet his mind. His thoughts were racing. The fallout had already begun. It wasn't just Robert Miller who was under fire now, it was the entire HOA. The board members who had once seemed untouchable were now in damage control mode, scrambling to save face and maintain their grip on power. Sam knew they wouldn't go down without a fight, and the media would soon start poking around. The truth was out, but the fight for justice had only just begun. Sam couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake. Was it too late to turn back? Had he really thought they could fix everything just by exposing Robert Miller? Could he trust the community to rally behind him, or had he just torn it apart? He couldn't answer those questions yet. He didn't know what the future held. But one thing was certain, he was no longer alone in this fight. Emily was with him, and the truth was on his side. Later that afternoon, Sam met Emily at the diner. She was sitting in their usual booth, her laptop open in front of her, typing furiously. The moment she saw him, she closed the laptop and gestured for him to sit down. "We've got a problem," Emily said, her expression tense. "Robert isn't taking this lying down." Sam raised an eyebrow. "What's he doing?" Emily exhaled slowly. "He's called in his lawyers." They've sent a letter to the HOA, threatening to sue if the board doesn't retract the accusations and make a public apology. Sam clenched his jaw. It was exactly what he had feared. Robert wasn't going to back down. He was going to do everything in his power to bury this, to make sure no one believed the truth. "I'm not apologizing," Sam said firmly. "Not now, not ever. The community needs to know what's really been going on." Emily nodded in agreement. "We've got more work to do, Sam. But we can't let Robert intimidate us. If he thinks a letter is going to stop us, he's wrong." The battle lines were drawn. Robert Miller was coming for Sam, and he wasn't going to go down without a fight. But Sam wasn't afraid. The community had been kept in the dark for too long, and now it was time to shine a light on the truth. No matter the cost. As Sam left the diner and headed home, his mind kept racing. The fallout was just beginning, but he had no choice but to keep pushing forward. The more he thought about the future of Lakeview Heights, the more he knew that this wasn't just about his boat or his fight with Robert Miller. It was about something far bigger, the integrity of the community itself. The rules had been twisted, and it was time to rewrite them. It would be a hard fight, but Sam had learned one thing over the past few days: sometimes, the only way to fix what's broken is to tear it down first. And he was ready to take that fight to the next level. The tension that followed Sam's revelation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The next few days felt like an eternity. He woke up each morning to a storm of text messages, emails, and missed calls. News of his confrontation with the HOA had spread faster than he expected, and by the time he walked outside, the neighborhood was already buzzing with the fallout. Some people supported him, rallying behind the truth he'd exposed. Others, however, were skeptical, torn between their loyalty to the HOA and their own suspicions about the man they'd once trusted. And there were those who simply didn't want to get involved, those who were content to sit back and let the drama unfold from a distance. Sam knew the next few days were crucial. Robert Miller wasn't going to let this slide. He could already picture the high-priced lawyers on his side, ready to drag the community into a legal battle that could last for months. The stakes were growing higher by the hour. Sam couldn't afford to back down now. Not when they were so close to exposing the truth. That afternoon, Sam sat down at his kitchen table, his mind racing as he read through the letter from Robert's attorneys. The words were clear: if the HOA didn't retract the accusations and issue a public apology within 48 hours, they would file a lawsuit against the board for defamation and damages. The letter was intimidating, but Sam wasn't scared. Robert had underestimated him, thinking that a few legal threats would scare him off. He wasn't about to back down now, not when the truth was on his side. "Do we respond?" Emily asked, breaking him out of his thoughts. She had arrived unannounced, but Sam wasn't surprised. They had been working closely together for weeks, and they both knew that time was running out. He pushed the letter aside and leaned back in his chair. "We need to respond, but we need to do it carefully. We can't let Robert control the narrative. We've got to stay ahead of him, or he'll win by default." Emily nodded in agreement. "What are you thinking?" Sam exhaled slowly. "We need to get ahead of this before it spirals out of control. We can't let Robert paint us as the villains. We have to make sure the community knows what's at stake, what he's been hiding." "Right," Emily said, tapping her fingers on the table. "We need to get the truth out there in a way that no one can ignore. Maybe it's time to go public." Sam paused, considering her words. "You're right. If we want to stop this from becoming a drawn-out legal battle, we need to make sure the community is on our side. The more people that know what Robert's been doing, the harder it will be for him to silence us." Emily pulled out her laptop and began typing, her fingers moving quickly as she worked on a statement. Sam could see the wheels turning in her mind. She had always been the strategic one, the one with a plan for every possible outcome. "This needs to be loud," Emily said, looking up at him. "If we just send a private response to Robert's lawyers, we're not going to make the impact we need. We need to get this out into the open. Sam nodded. But we have to be careful. We don't want to make things worse than they already are. If we go too far, we risk losing our credibility. We'll be careful, Emily assured him. But this is our chance to change the narrative. By the time the evening rolled around, Sam and Emily had crafted a statement, a bold, no-holds-barred response to Robert's legal threats. It wasn't just a reply, it was an invitation to the community to take a stand. They called for a public meeting, where the residents of Lakeview Heights could come together to hear the full story and ask questions. The statement was direct and uncompromising. In response to the legal threats made by Robert Miller and his attorneys, we are not backing down. The truth about the corruption within the HOA and the manipulation of property values will be heard. We are calling on the residents of Lakeview Heights to join us at a public meeting to discuss the future of this community and the steps we can take to restore integrity and accountability. We will not allow a few individuals to dictate the future of this neighborhood. Sam took a deep breath as he sent the statement to a local news outlet. This was it. There was no turning back now. The next day, Sam received a call from the news station. They wanted to interview him about the situation. He knew this was exactly what they needed, the platform to make sure the story reached as many people as possible. With Emily by his side, Sam prepared to go public. When the news camera finally turned on, Sam's heart pounded in his chest. The bright lights were blinding, and the weight of the moment hit him all at once. This was the kind of moment he had dreamed about, but it felt so different in reality. The interviewer, a woman named Jennifer, smiled at him and began with the usual pleasantries. So, Sam, tell us a bit about what's been happening here in Lakeview Heights. Why are you taking this public stance against the HOA? Sam took a deep breath, steadying himself. It all started with the boat. The HOA tried to tell me I couldn't dock my boat on my own property, despite the fact that I've lived here for years without any problems. As I started digging into their regulations, I discovered something much bigger. The HOA has been allowing developers to manipulate property values, driving prices up and forcing people out of their homes. And at the center of it all is Robert Miller, a man who's been using his position to profit from the very rules he's supposed to enforce. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. That's a very serious accusation. What kind of evidence do you have to support these claims? Sam nodded, knowing this was the key moment to solidify his position. We have emails, real estate transactions, and internal documents from the HOA itself. Everything is laid out in black and white. The interview continued, but Sam felt the tide shifting. This wasn't just about his boat anymore. This was about a community that had been manipulated and taken advantage of by the very people who were supposed to protect it. As the news report aired that evening, Sam's phone buzzed non-stop. Messages poured in from neighbors, many of them asking questions or expressing support. Some were angry, feeling betrayed by the man they had once trusted. But others, more than Sam had expected, rallied behind him, showing up at his door with offers of help. The battle was far from over, but Sam could feel the winds shifting. The community was starting to wake up. The question now was whether it was too late for Robert Miller to stop the truth from coming out, or if the fight would escalate even further. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The day of the public meeting arrived. Sam stood at the front of the community hall, facing a sea of unfamiliar faces. Some were familiar neighbors, others were complete strangers who had heard about the drama swirling around Lakeview Heights. The walls of the hall seemed to close in on him as he glanced around at the growing crowd. The turnout had been more than he expected. The news report had clearly caught people's attention, and the story was spreading far beyond his immediate circle. But even as the room filled with people, Sam couldn't help but feel the weight of what was at stake. This wasn't just a chance to expose Robert Miller, it was the moment when he would find out if the community would stand with him, or if he had unwittingly sparked a conflict that could tear them all apart. Emily stood by his side, her posture calm and confident, but even she couldn't hide the concern in her eyes. She knew how high the stakes were, but she had always been a fighter, and Sam drew strength from her resolve. The room buzzed with conversation. People whispered to each other, eyeing the stage where Sam and Emily were standing. Sam adjusted the microphone in front of him, preparing for the moment when he would address the crowd. The murmurs died down as the lights dimmed, and a spotlight focused on Sam. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Sam began, his voice steady despite the tension. "I know this has been a difficult time for many of us. We've all been hearing rumors and accusations, and it's hard to know who to trust. But I want to make one thing clear, I didn't start this fight. It was started by the people who have been exploiting all of us, by the people who've used their power to manipulate our homes and our futures." He paused, allowing his words to settle. The crowd was silent, hanging on to every word. "I've been living here for years, just like most of you. And like many of you, I've been frustrated with the way things have been going with the HOA. But when I found out the truth about what was really happening behind the scenes, about how Robert Miller and the board were allowing developers to control property values, pushing out longtime residents like us, I couldn't stay silent any longer." The room was still. Sam could feel the weight of the community's divided feelings pressing down on him, but he continued. "I've made it clear, this isn't just about my boat or the HOA rules. This is about all of us. It's about our homes, our families, and our future here in Lakeview Heights. We deserve better than what we've been given. And I'm not backing down." Emily stepped forward, taking over from Sam as she addressed the crowd with a voice of authority. "We've got the evidence," she said, looking around the room. "Emails, real estate documents, even board meeting minutes. Everything you need to see the full picture. Robert Miller and the others have been using their power for their personal gain, and that stops now." As she spoke, Sam looked around the room. Some faces were angry, shaking their heads in disbelief, while others were nodding, beginning to see the truth. A woman in the front row stood up and raised her hand. "I've lived here for 30 years, she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And I've never seen anything like this. If what you're saying is true, how come no one knew about it?" Sam met her gaze. "That's the problem. People didn't know because Robert and the board kept it all in the dark. They've been controlling everything from behind the scenes, pushing people out who didn't fit their plan. But now that the truth is out, we can't let them get away with it." A man in the back row shouted, "You're accusing Robert Miller of this? The man built this community. What kind of evidence do you have?" Sam felt a pang of frustration. He knew this would be the hardest part, convincing people who had trusted Robert for so long. But he was ready. "We've got everything," Sam said. "It's all documented. Robert Miller is part of a system that's been systematically driving up property values by exploiting residents, changing zoning laws, and secretly selling to developers who don't care about this community. The truth is right here in front of us, and we have to stand up for what's right." The room was quiet, and Sam could see the wheels turning in people's minds. Some still looked skeptical, but others were beginning to nod, exchanging looks of concern. This was the moment when they had to decide whether they were going to let Robert Miller and the HOA control their lives, or if they were going to fight back. A voice from the back shouted, "So, what are we supposed to do now? Just tear everything down? You want us to fight this whole system?" Sam took a deep breath. "No. I don't want to tear anything down. What I want is for us to take back control of our community. I want us to rebuild a system where everyone has a say, where we're all treated fairly. We need to remove the people who have been running this place for their own benefit and put in place new leadership that actually cares about the people of Lakeview Heights." Emily nodded in agreement. "But we can't do this alone. We need all of you to stand with us. If we're going to fight Robert Miller and his cronies, we need this community behind us." Another hand shot up. This time, it was a man who had lived in Lakeview Heights for decades. He was a respected figure in the neighborhood, and his words carried weight. "I've known Robert for a long time," he said slowly. "And I never thought he was capable of something like this. But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. We've all been paying more in HOA fees. Our property taxes keep rising. Maybe it's time we take a hard look at what's been happening." The crowd murmured in agreement. Sam felt a sense of hope rising in him. This was the turning point. They were starting to come together. As the meeting went on, more and more residents voiced their concerns, asking questions, and demanding answers. Some were hesitant, afraid of what this fight might mean for their homes or their relationships with the HOA. But others were eager to take action, inspired by the possibility of change. By the end of the meeting, Sam could see the shift. The community was no longer divided in the way it had been. They had a common goal now, to reclaim their neighborhood from the grip of those who had been using it for their own gain. The meeting ended with a commitment to organize a petition, a call for transparency, and a demand for Robert Miller's resignation from the HOA board. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a step in the right direction. As Sam and Emily stood in the back of the room, watching people gather and talk amongst themselves, Sam turned to her with a tired but hopeful smile. "We did it," he said softly. "We've started something bigger than we could have imagined." Emily smiled back, but there was a glint of determination in her eyes. "This is just the beginning, Sam. The real fight is still ahead of us." The morning after the public meeting, Sam woke up with a sense of exhaustion in his bones. It was only a few hours of sleep, but the adrenaline from the previous night still coursed through his veins. The meeting had been a success, but it was only a small victory. The real work was just beginning. He needed to capitalize on the momentum they had built and rally the community to take the next step, a petition. Emily was already at his door before he had time to make his first cup of coffee. She was armed with her usual energy, her laptop open and a folder of documents under her arm. She had been working late, organizing the notes from the meeting, and drafting the petition they would present to the HOA board. "We've got a lot to do today," Emily said as soon as Sam answered. "We need to get this petition out there, and we need to make sure it's airtight." Sam nodded, rubbing his face. "I know. But we need to be careful how we frame this. The last thing we want is for Robert to spin it as an attack on the whole community. This has to be about accountability, not division." "Exactly," Emily said, setting the folder down on the kitchen counter. "The petition needs to be clear, no ambiguity. We want to demand transparency from the HOA, but we also need to show that this isn't about destroying the community. It's about fixing it." They spent the next several hours perfecting the petition, reviewing every word for clarity. The language had to be direct, but it couldn't be inflammatory. The goal wasn't to incite a riot, it was to show the HOA that the residents were done being pushed around. Sam and Emily drafted the following statement. "We, the undersigned residents of Lakeview Heights, hereby petition the HOA board to provide full transparency regarding their dealings with developers, property value manipulations, and their overall impact on the residents of this community. We demand the immediate resignation of Robert Miller from his position as president of the HOA and the creation of an independent audit of the HOA's financials and decision-making processes. We believe that the future of Lakeview Heights must be determined by its residents, not by the self-serving interests of a few individuals. This petition is a call to action for the betterment of our community." Sam read over the petition one more time. This was the moment of truth. If they could get enough signatures, the HOA would have no choice but to respond. If they failed, Robert Miller would maintain control, and everything they had fought for would unravel. "We're ready," Emily said, closing her laptop. "Let's hit the streets." The plan was simple. Sam and Emily would walk through the neighborhood, knocking on doors, speaking to residents, and gathering signatures. They knew the process wouldn't be easy. There would be people who didn't care about the issues at hand, people who would be afraid to sign for fear of reprisal, and, of course, those who still blindly supported Robert Miller. But they had to try. As they made their way down the first street, Sam felt a knot in his stomach. Every door they knocked on felt like a gamble. But as soon as the first neighbor agreed to sign, the knot loosened. Then the second. And the third. It was slow at first. Awkward conversations about Robert Miller's actions, about the future of Lakeview Heights, and about why people should care. But with each signature, Sam felt more hopeful. The more they talked to people, the more he realized that the issue wasn't just about the boat or the HOA rules, it was about a community feeling disempowered and ignored. "I've lived here for over 20 years, one neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, said as she signed the petition. "And I've seen how things have changed. This community used to be about neighbors helping neighbors. Now it feels like a business to them. I'm with you." Her words stuck with Sam. This wasn't just about fixing a few rules, it was about restoring something that had been lost. Something that everyone in Lakeview Heights deserved to have back. By midday, Sam and Emily had already collected over 50 signatures. But it wasn't just the number that gave Sam hope, it was the quality of the support. Many of the signatures came from people who had been hesitant the night of the meeting, but now they were ready to stand with him. The more people learned about the truth behind the HOA's actions, the more they realized that the community had been taken for granted for too long. But there was still a long way to go. As they approached the last few houses, Sam's phone buzzed. It was a text from his neighbor, Doug. "Robert Miller's people are out in full force. Watch your back." Sam's heart sank. He had known it wouldn't be easy, but hearing that Robert was starting to retaliate made it all too real. He looked at Emily, who had already seen the message. "We can't stop now," Emily said firmly. "If Robert thinks he can intimidate us, he's wrong. This is our community, Sam. We need to keep going." Sam took a deep breath and nodded. "You're right. We keep pushing forward." They continued on, feeling the pressure of the mounting resistance. Some doors were slammed in their faces. Some residents were so afraid of the repercussions that they refused to even look them in the eye. But despite the occasional setback, Sam knew they were making progress. As the day wore on, they had collected over 100 signatures. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. Sam felt a renewed sense of determination. The community was waking up, one door at a time. The following days were a blur of canvassing and phone calls. Sam and Emily worked tirelessly, reaching out to as many residents as possible, urging them to sign the petition. Word was spreading quickly, and soon the petition was circulating on social media, gathering support from even more people who had heard about the situation but hadn't yet gotten involved. But as the petition grew, so did the tension. Robert Miller and his supporters began to fight back in full force. There were whispers about Sam being too radical and trying to tear the community apart. Some of the older residents, who had known Robert for years, were having second thoughts, afraid that the changes Sam was advocating for might be too drastic. Despite the opposition, Sam and Emily refused to back down. They knew they were in the right, and the more they heard from their supporters, the more they were convinced they couldn't stop now. One evening, as Sam sat at his kitchen table, reading through the latest batch of signatures, his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, he answered. "Sam," the voice on the other end said, "this is Robert Miller." Sam's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what to expect. "We need to talk," Robert said, his tone cold and calculating. "This petition of yours is a mistake. You're pushing things too far. I'm offering you a way out. Stop this nonsense, and I'll make sure you're not blacklisted from this community. You'll still be part of everything." Sam's grip on the phone tightened. "I'm not backing down, Robert. You've had your chance. It's time for change." Robert's laugh echoed on the other end of the line. "You'll regret this, Sam. You have no idea what you're up against." The call ended abruptly, leaving Sam with a mix of anger and resolve. He knew now, more than ever, that this wasn't just about a boat, it was about the future of Lakeview Heights. The days following Robert Miller's phone call were fraught with tension. Sam couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes had just been raised. Robert had made it clear he wasn't going to give up easily, and that meant Sam couldn't afford to back down. Emily, always the strategist, knew this battle was far from over. If anything, it had only just begun. The petition had gained significant traction. By the end of the week, over 300 signatures had been collected. It was a powerful statement. But Sam knew that even with such overwhelming support, they still faced a huge hurdle: the HOA board. The pressure was mounting from all sides. Robert Miller wasn't just going to sit back and let this go. The rumor mill in Lakeview Heights was running wild. Whispers of smear campaigns and desperate attempts to discredit Sam were already spreading. A few of Sam's longtime neighbors had stopped returning his calls, avoiding eye contact in the street, and refusing to sign the petition. It was clear that Robert was beginning to fight dirty. The next evening, Sam met Emily at the local cafe to discuss their next steps. They were sitting in a corner booth, each with a cup of coffee in front of them, but neither really drinking. Sam could see the exhaustion in Emily's eyes, though she was doing her best to hide it. "I think we're hitting a wall," Emily said, tapping her pen on the table. "Robert's people are spreading rumors about you. I've heard that some residents are being warned not to sign the petition or there'll be consequences. I'm worried we're losing the support we've built." Sam rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "I don't get it, Emily. How can they be so blind to what's going on? How can they let Robert manipulate everything like this?" Emily leaned forward, her voice calm but resolute. "That's exactly the problem, Sam. For years, Robert's been the face of this community. He's built his reputation on being the good guy, the benevolent leader. People trust him, and they don't want to believe the truth about what he's been doing." Sam's jaw clenched. He knew she was right. It wasn't just the power of the HOA board. It was the influence Robert had cultivated over the years, manipulating not just property values, but people's trust and loyalty. "I just don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," Sam admitted. "The pressure is getting to me. I'm getting phone calls in the middle of the night, and now my neighbors are treating me like I'm some kind of villain. I thought I was doing the right thing, but it's like the whole town is against me." Emily's eyes softened. "You're doing the right thing, Sam. Sometimes the right thing is the hardest thing. But that's why people need to see it. We can't let Robert win. Not like this." Sam nodded slowly, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't give up. Not after everything they had built. But he also knew they needed a plan, something that would turn the tide in their favor. "We need to go public," Sam said, his voice suddenly firm. "We've got the petition, but we need more. We need the media. We need to get this story out there, show people the truth." Emily raised an eyebrow. "The media? You think that'll work?" "It's our only option," Sam replied. "If we keep going door to door, we'll just keep running into walls. But if we get the story in the paper, maybe we can force Robert's hand. Maybe we'll expose what he's been doing." Emily hesitated for a moment, clearly considering the risks. "I think you're right. But we'll need a solid case. We can't just go to the press with accusations. We need hard evidence, something that proves everything he's been doing." Sam leaned back in his chair, his mind turning. The documents they had gathered, the emails, the zoning records, the real estate transactions, were important, but they needed something more. They needed a smoking gun, something that would be undeniable. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Sam and Emily pored over every document they had, looking for that one piece of evidence that would seal Robert's fate. They scoured the HOA meeting minutes, cross-referenced property tax records, and dug deeper into the connections between Robert Miller and the developers he'd been working with. It was exhausting, but Sam was determined. They finally found it, a key piece of correspondence between Robert Miller and a prominent real estate developer. The email detailed a confidential meeting where Robert had directly encouraged the developer to purchase more properties in the area, all while suggesting ways to manipulate the community's perception of the project. The email clearly indicated that Robert had been acting in the best interest of the developers, not the residents. "That's it," Emily said as she printed the email and placed it in front of Sam. "This is the smoking gun we need." Sam's heart raced. This was the evidence they'd been looking for. He had no doubt that this would be the proof they needed to get the media involved. "Let's go to the press," Sam said, his voice filled with renewed confidence. The following morning, Sam and Emily made their way to the local newspaper office. The building was old but well kept, a relic of Lakeview Heights history. They had a meeting scheduled with a reporter named Jane Harper, a woman who had been known for her investigative work and had earned the respect of the community. If anyone could take this story seriously, it was her. As they walked into her office, Jane looked up from her desk, her expression neutral. She had the look of someone who had seen it all. Sam and Emily sat down across from her, and Sam wasted no time. "We have a story for you," he said, sliding the email across the desk. "It's about Robert Miller and his connection to the developers who've been manipulating this community. We've got proof he's been acting against the interests of the residents." Jane picked up the email, reading it quickly. Her brow furrowed as she processed the information. "This is big," she said, looking up at them. "If what you're saying is true, this could shake the foundation of this community. But you're going to need more than just one email. You need to show a pattern, a history of this happening." Sam nodded. "We've got more, emails, financial records, everything we've gathered. It all lines up. Robert Miller's been using the HOA for his own gain, and the residents have been paying the price." Jane leaned back in her chair, clearly weighing her options. "If this pans out, I'll need to run a full investigation. But you're not going to like the fallout. If this goes public, people will take sides. Are you prepared for that?" Sam glanced at Emily, who gave him a silent nod. "We're ready," Sam said. "The community deserves to know the truth." That afternoon, the story hit the front page of the Lakeview Heights Herald. The headline read, "Exclusive, HOA President Accused of Corruption and Collusion with Developers." The article detailed the evidence Sam and Emily had uncovered, and it made a compelling case for Robert Miller's resignation from the HOA. The fallout was immediate. Robert Miller, predictably, denied everything. He claimed that the accusations were baseless and part of a personal vendetta. But the damage was done. The community was in an uproar, and the HOA's credibility had taken a massive hit. The story had hit the papers, and there was no turning back now. The quiet town of Lakeview Heights was no longer the peaceful, idyllic neighborhood it once was. Sam could feel the shift in the air, the tension simmering just below the surface as residents began to take sides. The fight over the future of the community had gone public, and everyone seemed to have an opinion on what should happen next. Sam sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through the endless stream of social media posts about the scandal. Some of the comments were supportive, praising him for his courage in exposing Robert Miller's corruption. Others were far less kind, calling him a troublemaker and accusing him of trying to destroy the neighborhood. The community was divided, and Sam could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. Emily, as usual, was the calm in the storm. She was glued to her laptop, responding to emails and organizing the next steps for their campaign. She was focused, determined, and unshaken by the chaos around them. But Sam could see the fatigue in her eyes. They were both running on fumes, and the pressure was beginning to show. "You've seen the online comments, right?" Sam asked, his voice tight. "People are pissed. Some of them are even threatening us." Emily glanced up from her screen and nodded. "Yeah, I've seen them. But that's to be expected. Whenever someone shakes up the status quo, there are going to be people who resist. We can't let it get to us." "I know," Sam said, running a hand through his hair. It's just. I never thought it would come to this. I'm just trying to do the right thing, but it feels like I've turned my whole life upside down. Emily leaned forward, her eyes softening. You are doing the right thing, Sam. We're exposing something that's been hurting this community for years. Yes, it's messy, and yes, it's uncomfortable. But if we don't stand up for what's right, then who will? Sam took a deep breath and nodded. He knew she was right. They couldn't back down now. Not when they were so close to the truth. The real challenge, however, was what came next. The fallout from the article had been swift. Robert Miller's supporters, who had once been quiet but loyal, were now openly rallying behind him. They had formed a group called Save Lakeview Heights, and their primary message was clear: Sam was a threat to the community, a divisive force that needed to be stopped before the town was torn apart. See what you've done, one of Robert's supporters, Doug Williams, said to Sam the next morning, when Sam ran into him at the local grocery store. Doug was a longtime resident, a neighbor who had always seemed friendly, but now his eyes were cold, filled with suspicion. I didn't do anything but expose the truth, Sam replied, trying to keep his composure. You've got to understand, Doug, Robert's been manipulating this community for years. The developers, the shady deals, it's all coming to light. Doug shook his head. That's not what the community needs, Sam. We don't need your drama. We need peace and stability. You've got people talking about leaving, about selling their homes. This isn't good for anyone. Sam felt a pang of guilt, but he couldn't let it derail him. What about the people who can't leave? The ones who've been hurt by Robert's actions? You think they're just going to sit by and accept it? Doug's expression hardened. You're tearing this place apart. You're making people choose sides, Sam. And that's not what this community is about. Sam didn't have an answer. Doug's words stung, but he knew the truth wasn't always popular. The fight wasn't over, but it was far from easy. That night, Emily and Sam gathered in the living room to strategize. They knew the next step was crucial. The HOA board would be meeting soon to discuss the fallout from the article, and Robert would undoubtedly do everything he could to shift the blame onto them. Sam and Emily had to be ready. We've got to make sure we're not just reacting, Emily said, pacing back and forth. We need to be proactive. We need a plan to take the narrative back. Sam nodded. You're right. But how do we do that when the whole town seems divided? Half the people are behind Robert, and the other half are too scared to take a stand. We focus on the people who are on our side, Emily replied. We need to unite those who see the truth. The ones who understand what's really going on here. Sam sat up straighter. You're talking about organizing a rally. A show of force. Emily smiled. Exactly. If we can get enough people together, we can put the pressure on the HOA board. We need to show them that the majority of the community wants change, that we're not just a vocal minority. The idea felt right, but Sam couldn't shake the feeling that things were escalating. A rally would surely make headlines, but it would also paint a target on their backs. And with Robert's supporters already on edge, he knew it could be risky. You think it'll work? Sam asked. Emily met his gaze with quiet confidence. I know it will. We have the facts, we have the support, and we have the community's future on our side. This is our chance to turn the tide. In the days that followed, Emily worked tirelessly to organize the rally. They spread the word through social media, flyers, and word of mouth. The response was overwhelming. More and more residents came forward, expressing their frustration with the HOA and Robert Miller's leadership. They were ready for change, ready to stand up for their community. The day of the rally, Sam arrived early to help set up. The parking lot behind the community center had been transformed into a gathering space, with signs and banners proclaiming slogans like, "Time for Transparency," and "The Community United for Change." There was an air of nervous anticipation, but also a sense of resolve. The rally wasn't just about Sam or Emily, it was about everyone who had been silenced for far too long. As people began to gather, Sam's heart swelled with hope. It was happening. This was the moment they had been working toward. But as the crowd grew, Sam couldn't help but notice the familiar faces of Robert's supporters standing off to the side, watching with disdain. They weren't here to listen, they were here to intimidate. Emily appeared beside him, her eyes scanning the crowd. "This is it, Sam. We've got to make it count." Sam nodded. "Let's make our voices heard." The rally began with a few words from Sam and Emily, but soon it was clear that the crowd was speaking for themselves. People who had never before been involved in the HOA or town politics were now stepping up, sharing their stories, their frustration, and their hopes for a better future. The more they spoke, the more the crowd rallied behind them. It was powerful. It was moving. And it was just what the community needed. As the rally came to a close, Sam and Emily stood side by side, looking out over the crowd. There were hundreds of people gathered, all united by one common goal, to take back control of their community. And then, through the crowd, Sam saw something that made his stomach drop. Robert Miller, flanked by a few of his supporters, was standing at the edge of the rally, watching with a cold, calculating gaze. The battle was far from over. But Sam knew, at that moment, that he wasn't fighting alone. The day after the rally, the whole town was buzzing. Sam could feel the energy in the air, half of Lakeview Heights was cheering, while the other half was bracing for what came next. Robert Miller had made it clear he wasn't going to back down, and now that the rally had sent shockwaves through the community, the next HOA board meeting was bound to be a showdown. Sam was in the kitchen, sipping his coffee, trying to prepare himself mentally. Emily had already left to meet with some of their supporters, gathering more signatures for their petition, making sure their voices would be heard at the meeting. Sam couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get ugly. He glanced at his phone, noticing the flood of text messages and missed calls. Most of them were from friends and neighbors, offering support, but some were less friendly. Robert's supporters had ramped up their smear campaign, and Sam could feel the pressure mounting. People were nervous, and the community was fracturing faster than he had anticipated. Emily came in a few minutes later, looking determined but visibly tired. She had that look in her eyes, the one Sam had come to recognize as business mode. She wasn't just thinking about today's meeting, she was thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. "You ready?" she asked, setting down her purse. "As ready as I'll ever be," Sam replied, trying to steady his nerves. "But I can't help but feel like this is just the beginning of something bigger. If we win this, Robert's not going to take it lying down." Emily raised an eyebrow. "You really think Robert's going to go quietly?" "He's going to fight us tooth and nail, Sam. We need to be prepared for that. But right now, the important thing is that we show up at that meeting with a clear message. We're not backing down." Sam nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. It was time to face the HOA board and the community head-on. The meeting was held at the community center, a large, open room with long tables and folding chairs. It was standing room only when Sam and Emily arrived. The crowd was a mix of their supporters and Roberts, everyone was here to see what would happen next. As Sam walked through the door, he felt the eyes of the entire room on him. Some of the looks were warm, full of support, but many were cold, filled with suspicion. At the front of the room, the HOA board members were already seated. Robert Miller was sitting at the center, his posture rigid, his face a mask of control. The other members, many of whom Sam had known for years, sat quietly beside him, their expressions unreadable. Sam couldn't help but notice that there were fewer empty seats than usual. Robert had clearly called in reinforcements. Emily leaned in close to Sam. "We've got this," she whispered. "We're not alone." Sam gave her a tight smile, but his heart was pounding. He knew this was the moment that would determine everything. The meeting started with the usual formalities, the typical slow procession of introductions and updates. But Sam wasn't here for small talk. He was here to make his case and put everything on the line. When it was his turn to speak, Sam stood up, his legs shaky but his resolve firm. He walked to the front, feeling the eyes of the entire room follow his every move. He cleared his throat, gripping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "I'm here tonight because I believe in this community. I believe in Lakeview Heights. And I believe that the time has come for us to take back control of our future." He paused, letting his words settle into the room. Some people nodded in agreement, others crossed their arms defensively. "Robert Miller has been leading this community for years, but under his leadership, things have not gotten better," Sam continued. "We've uncovered evidence that he's been working with developers for his own gain, at the expense of the residents here. His actions have hurt families, have hurt our neighbors, and now it's time for us to say, enough." The room was silent. Sam could hear the low murmurs of the audience, some of them whispering to each other. Robert's supporters were visibly agitated, but they held their tongues, for now. Sam looked out at the crowd, trying to gauge the reaction. "We're not asking for much," he said, his voice growing stronger. "We're asking for transparency. We're asking for the truth to be brought to light. We're asking for an end to the manipulation that has been going on behind the scenes. And we're asking for a community where all of us, every single one of us, has a say in what happens next." He turned to the board. "This isn't just about me or Emily. This is about all of us. This is about protecting the future of Lakeview Heights for everyone, not just for the developers who've been lining their pockets at our expense." There was a long pause. For a moment, Sam thought the room was going to explode. But Robert Miller stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Mr. Anderson," Robert said, his voice cutting through the silence. "What you're saying is not only unfounded but reckless. You've been spreading lies and sowing division in this community. You've stirred up trouble where there was none, and now you're trying to drag the HOA into your personal vendetta. We've been transparent with the residents, and all this talk about developers is nothing but a smear campaign." Sam met Robert's gaze, refusing to back down. "I'm not the one hiding the truth, Robert. You are." Robert's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Instead, he gestured to one of his supporters in the back. A man named Doug Williams stood up, his face flushed with anger. "Sam's right about one thing," Doug said, his voice rising. "Robert's been the face of this community for years. We've trusted him. We've supported him. And now you come in here, stirring up chaos and making accusations with no proof. If you want to tear this community apart, Sam, that's on you." Doug's words struck a chord with some of the crowd. A few people clapped, and Sam could feel the hostility growing. But he wasn't going to let that stop him. "I'm not trying to tear anything apart," Sam said, his voice steady. "I'm trying to save it." The next few hours were a blur. Arguments flew back and forth. Robert's supporters claimed Sam was out for personal gain. Sam's supporters fired back with the evidence they had gathered, showing that Robert's actions were clearly in conflict with the community's interests. The room was a battleground, a place where old friendships were being tested, and long-standing allegiances were being challenged. When the meeting finally came to a close, the tension in the room was palpable. No decision had been made, there would be another meeting in 2 weeks to discuss the next steps, but Sam knew that the real battle was just beginning. The HOA board had been forced to confront the truth, but Robert Miller was far from finished. As Sam and Emily walked out of the meeting room, Emily turned to him, her eyes intense. "That went better than I expected," she said. "We got the truth out there. Now we need to keep the pressure on. Robert's not going to back down, but neither are we." Sam nodded. "This fight is far from over. But we're on the right side of history. And we'll keep pushing." The battle for Lakeview Heights was just beginning, and Sam knew one thing for sure: He wasn't going to stop until the truth was exposed and the community was free from Robert's grip. The days following the chaotic HOA meeting were marked by a strange kind of stillness. Lakeview Heights had been shaken to its core, yet there was a palpable sense of waiting in the air. Both sides of the conflict had retreated to their corners, nursing their wounds and preparing for the inevitable next round. Sam knew this uneasy calm wouldn't last long. Robert Miller wasn't the type to let things slide without a fight. Sam and Emily spent the next week regrouping, assessing the damage from the meeting, and solidifying their strategy for the upcoming 2-week deadline. Every evening, they would meet in their living room, surrounded by papers, notes, and laptops, brainstorming ways to maintain momentum. They were tired, but they were resolute. The fight had escalated, and so had the stakes. "I don't know how much longer we can keep up this pace," Emily said one evening, running her hand through her hair. "People are starting to burn out. Even the most dedicated supporters are losing steam." Sam looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowed in thought. "I know. But we can't afford to stop now. If we do, Robert wins. We need to keep this momentum going, even if it means going to extremes." "I'm not sure what more we can do," Emily sighed. "We've exposed the corruption, we've rallied the community, but Robert still has the HOA board and all those influential people in his corner. We're just a few voices against an entire machine." Sam's mind raced. He had been thinking about this for days. Robert had the board, the money, and the influence, but they had something far more powerful, the truth. And Sam was starting to realize they needed to make a bold move, something that would force Robert to confront them head-on. "Maybe it's time we stop playing by the rules," Sam said suddenly. Emily looked up, her expression curious but cautious. "What do you mean? What if we took the fight directly to Robert? We need to hit him where it hurts most, his reputation. We have evidence, right? His dirty dealings with the developers, the financials, the backdoor deals. What if we brought it all out into the open, not just at the next HOA meeting, but in the media? Public pressure might be the only thing that makes him back down." Emily was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "That's a big step. You're talking about going public in a way we've never done before." "Exactly," Sam said, his voice steady. "We can't let this drag on. Robert's counting on us to get tired, to back off. We need to strike while the iron's hot." Emily hesitated but then nodded. "Okay. Let's do it. But we need to be sure the information is airtight. If we're going to go public, there's no turning back." Sam agreed. They would need to take extra precautions. They couldn't afford to make a mistake now. But there was one more thing on Sam's mind, a piece of the puzzle that had been nagging at him since the meeting. "I've been thinking," Sam said, tapping his fingers on the table. "What if we could find someone from Robert's inner circle to testify against him? Someone who knows all the dirty secrets but has stayed quiet up until now. We need an insider." Emily's eyes widened as realization dawned on her. "You're right. If we could get someone on the inside, someone with direct knowledge of what Robert's been doing behind closed doors, that would be a game changer." But as Sam and Emily continued brainstorming, neither of them knew that an unexpected ally was about to emerge, someone who had been watching from the shadows and waiting for the right moment to step forward. 2 days later, as Sam was heading out to run some errands, he received an unexpected phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it made him answer. "Hello?" Sam said, his voice guarded. "Sam Anderson?" the voice on the other end asked. It was low and cautious, almost hesitant. "This is Paul Reynolds. I'm a friend of Doug Williams. I know you've been trying to expose Robert Miller, and I think I can help." Sam's heart skipped a beat. "Doug's friend? Wait, how can you help?" "I work for Robert," Paul said quickly. "I've been his accountant for the past 5 years. I've seen the things he's done, the way he's manipulated the books, the way he's been working with those developers. I can prove it. Sam froze. This was it. This was the insider he had been hoping for. You're serious? I'm serious, Paul replied. But I need to be careful. Robert's not the kind of man you cross without consequences. If I'm going to help you, it has to be done the right way. I've got copies of the records, the emails, everything. But I need protection, Sam. You need to make sure I'm safe. Sam's mind raced. This was the break they'd been waiting for. But the risks were enormous. If Robert found out who was behind the leak, Paul would be in danger, and so would Sam. The stakes had just gone even higher. I can't promise anything, Paul, Sam said, trying to steady his voice. But we'll do everything we can to protect you. Meet me tomorrow at the old cafe by the lake. I'll bring Emily. We'll talk more there. All right. I'll be there, Paul said before hanging up. Sam stood there for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. This was the turning point he had been waiting for. They had the evidence now, the real, undeniable proof that Robert Miller was corrupt to the core. But Sam knew the danger wasn't over. If they moved too quickly, they could lose everything. The media exposure was still a risk, but this new information could be their ticket to finally bringing Robert down. The next day, Sam and Emily met Paul Reynolds at the cafe by the lake. The cafe was small, nestled between the trees, with a view of the water that usually offered a sense of calm. But today, it felt like a battlefield. Paul was a middle-aged man with a nervous demeanor. He looked like someone who had spent too many years in the shadows, keeping secrets and staying quiet. But today, he was finally speaking up. I've got everything you need, Paul said, his voice shaky. He handed over a manila envelope filled with documents, copies of emails, spreadsheets, and contracts that would prove Robert's illegal dealings with the developers. This is the smoking gun. But I'm not doing this for free. I need something in return. Sam's stomach tightened. What do you want? I want to be free from Robert's control. I want a guarantee that he can't retaliate against me once this goes public. I don't care what happens to Robert, but I can't lose my job, my life, for doing the right thing. Sam looked over at Emily. She nodded, her expression firm. We can make sure you're protected. But you have to trust us. If we go public with this, it's not just about you and me anymore. It's about the entire community. Paul swallowed hard. I know what I'm getting into. I just want to make sure I can start over when this is all over. Sam nodded. You will. I promise. With the documents in hand, Sam and Emily were ready for the next step. The information Paul had provided was solid, irrefutable evidence that Robert Miller had been manipulating the HOA for years, lining his pockets with developer kickbacks and steering contracts to his own companies. Now, the fight was about to take a dramatic turn. But as they left the cafe, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning, and that Robert Miller would stop at nothing to protect his empire. The air around Lakeview Heights was thick with tension, as if the very ground beneath them was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Sam and Emily were no longer just fighting for their own homes, they were fighting for the truth, for justice, and for the future of their community. The evidence Paul had handed them was a game-changer, but they knew that going public would make them targets. This was no longer just about the HOA or Robert Miller, it was about exposing the corruption that had been allowed to fester unchecked for far too long. For days, Sam and Emily worked around the clock, meticulously reviewing the documents Paul had provided. The emails were damning, the contracts clear, and the financial records irrefutable. They had everything they needed to blow Robert Miller's empire wide open. But the decision still weighed heavily on Sam's mind. Was it time to go public? Was the community ready for the truth? And more importantly, would they be able to protect Paul, and themselves, from the fallout? It was late one evening when Emily finally spoke the words Sam had been dreading, and expecting, since this all began. We can't wait any longer, she said, looking up from the stack of documents that had become their constant companion. The longer we keep this to ourselves, the more power Robert has to cover it up. We need to take action, and we need to do it now. Sam sat back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. I know. I've been thinking the same thing. But we can't go public without the right support. If we do this alone, Robert will turn the whole town against us. We need the press. We need someone to make this story impossible to ignore. Emily's expression hardened. I agree. But I think I know just the person. If we want this to blow up, we need someone with a reputation for digging deep. Someone who's not afraid to go after the powerful. I have a friend at the local newspaper, Hannah Brooks. She's been investigating corruption in local government for years. She'll listen to us. We just need to get to her before Robert does. Sam thought for a moment. Hannah Brooks was a name he recognized, even if they hadn't crossed paths directly. She had written a few controversial articles about local politics and had built a reputation as a relentless investigative reporter. If anyone could get the story out in a way that couldn't be ignored, it was her. All right, Sam said, his voice firm. Let's reach out to her. If she agrees to help, we'll have the leverage we need to go public. The next morning, Emily reached out to Hannah, sending her a cryptic message that promised the story of a lifetime. She made it clear that it was urgent and offered to meet in person. It didn't take long for Hannah to respond. They met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, a quiet place where no one would overhear them. Sam and Emily arrived first, sitting nervously at a corner table, glancing at the door every few seconds. When Hannah arrived, she was exactly as Emily had described, sharp, no nonsense, and looking like she was ready to take on the world. After a brief round of introductions and pleasantries, they got down to business. I'm intrigued, Hannah said, her gaze fixed on Sam. What's so urgent that you had to contact me directly? You know I don't usually take tips without some serious evidence. Sam exchanged a glance with Emily before pulling the manila envelope from his bag. He slid it across the table to Hannah, his heart racing. This, Sam said, his voice steady but full of anticipation, is everything you need to take down Robert Miller. Hannah didn't hesitate. She opened the envelope and began flipping through the documents with a practiced eye. Sam watched as she absorbed the information, her brow furrowing as she processed the weight of what they were asking her to do. This is, Hannah started, pausing as she flipped to the last page of financial records. This is huge. You're not exaggerating. No, Emily replied. It's all here. We've got proof that Robert Miller has been working with developers to manipulate the HOA for his own gain, lining his pockets with money that should have gone to the community. This isn't just corruption. It's betrayal. Hannah looked up, her eyes narrowing. And what do you want from me? We need you to take this story and make it public, Sam said. We're going to need media coverage to expose him, but we also need someone who can follow the trail. The public needs to see what he's been doing, and they need to know it's not just us making these claims. We need proof, and we need it to come from someone they trust. Hannah nodded, her face set in a determined expression. I can do that. But if I'm going to help you, we need to move quickly. The longer this stays under wraps, the easier it will be for Robert to sweep it under the rug. And trust me, he will try. You won't have to do it alone, Emily said. We've got Paul Reynolds on our side. He was Robert's accountant. He can vouch for everything in those documents. Hannah looked between them, then exhaled sharply. All right. I'll take this. But you're right, we need to move fast. I'll run a background check on Paul, and we'll start getting the story together. I'll need to speak with him directly, though. Sam felt a weight lift off his shoulders. I'll set it up. He's agreed to meet again. Hannah stood up, slipping the envelope into her bag. I'll be in touch. And Sam, Emily, I hope you're ready for what's coming. Once this hits the press, there's no turning back. You've already stepped into the ring. Now it's time to fight. The following week felt like a blur of activity. Hannah and her team of reporters worked quickly to verify the documents and cross-check the information. Sam and Emily stayed in close contact with Paul, making sure he was prepared to speak with Hannah and provide further testimony if needed. They could feel the walls closing in as Robert's empire began to crumble piece by piece. As the day of the story's release drew near, the sense of anticipation in Lakeview Heights was palpable. The people on both sides of the conflict were waiting for something to tip the scales in their favor. Would the truth be enough to expose Robert Miller? Or would his influence and power be enough to silence the truth once again? Sam couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. They had come so far, and yet, it felt like they were standing on the edge of something much bigger. If they succeeded, they could change the course of Lakeview Heights forever. But if they failed, they could lose everything. The countdown to the article's release had begun. The morning the article was released, Lakeview Heights held its breath. For weeks, the tension had been building, but now, it was here. The truth was about to be laid bare for everyone to see. Sam stood in front of his house, staring at his phone, waiting for the first sign that the world was about to change. Emily was inside, pacing back and forth, her nerves almost as visible as the jittering fingers she kept running through her hair. "I can't believe it's finally happening," Sam said, half to himself, half to Emily, as she emerged from the door, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "I can't either," Emily replied, her voice low. "But we can't go back now. Once it's out there, it's out there." The feeling of anticipation was heavy, thick in the air, like a storm cloud hanging above the lake. Sam turned to the street and noticed a few of their neighbors coming out of their homes, glancing in their direction with curious expressions. Everyone was waiting for the first sign of what would come next. And Sam couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened, it would change everything. The moment Sam opened his phone and refreshed the page, the headline jumped out at him. Lakeview Heights HOA president exposed for corruption, ties to developer kickbacks revealed. The article, written by investigative reporter Hannah Brooks, detailed everything Sam and Emily had uncovered about Robert Miller. His illegal financial dealings, the way he had manipulated the HOA, and the backdoor deals he had struck with developers to profit off the backs of the very people he was supposed to represent. It was everything they had hoped for, and yet, the weight of it was overwhelming. Sam could barely bring himself to read more than a few sentences. The scope of the betrayal was more extensive than he had imagined. For a moment, he wondered if they had truly been prepared for what this would mean, not just for Robert, but for everyone involved. But just as quickly as the article was released, the first reactions started flooding in. Social media exploded with people sharing the story, commenting on the scandal, and expressing their shock. The local news stations picked it up quickly, airing segments about the allegations, and by mid-morning, the town of Lakeview Heights was buzzing with rumors and chatter. Sam and Emily watched the responses roll in, both of them feeling a mix of triumph and dread. This wasn't just about them anymore. It wasn't just about their fight to save their homes. It was a battle for the community's soul. And they both knew that things were about to get much harder. By early afternoon, Robert Miller's response came in the form of a public statement, delivered via his PR team to the local news channels. He denied everything, of course. He claimed that the documents were fabricated, that the story was a smear campaign designed to ruin his reputation. His message was calm, composed, and deliberately designed to cast doubt on the evidence. He tried to paint himself as a victim of malicious forces, suggesting that his opponents were working with personal vendettas rather than a desire for justice. "The allegations are baseless," Robert stated in the video, his voice cool and measured. "This is a coordinated effort to undermine everything I've worked for. I've always acted in the best interests of Lakeview Heights, and I will not stand by and let these lies tarnish my name." Sam watched the video, his hands clenched into fists. Robert was lying through his teeth, but the problem was, many people in the community still believed him. Robert had spent years cultivating an image of a successful, well-connected man who only had the best intentions for the neighborhood. The smear campaign was predictable, but it still stung. What worried Sam was how easily people would buy into Robert's narrative. He had allies on the board, and there were others who would undoubtedly side with him, no matter how much evidence there was to the contrary. "What do we do now?" Emily asked, her voice strained with frustration as they both watched Robert's statement play out. "We keep pushing forward," Sam said, his voice determined despite the knot of anxiety twisting in his stomach. "We can't let his lies stand. We've got the evidence, and we've got the community behind us. But we need to keep up the pressure. We can't let this die down." Emily nodded, but there was still a lingering doubt in her eyes. What if it's not enough? What if Robert's people convince enough of the neighborhood that he's right? Sam didn't answer right away. He didn't want to lie to Emily, but the truth was, they didn't have a choice. This wasn't a battle of facts, it was a battle for public opinion. And the longer Robert had to spin his version of the story, the harder it would be to win. But Sam was determined to keep fighting. As evening descended on the town, Sam and Emily went to a local gathering at the community center. It was an impromptu event organized by their supporters, a way to rally the residents and encourage them to stand firm in the face of Robert's denials. When Sam and Emily arrived, they were greeted with mixed reactions. Some people were standing with their arms crossed, skeptical of the claims made in the article, while others were eager to hear more about the evidence. It was clear that the fight was far from over. As they approached the front of the room, Sam felt a surge of confidence. This was their moment to keep the pressure on. He had to address the people, speak directly to them, and remind them why they were all here. This wasn't just about two individuals fighting against a corrupt HOA president. It was about the future of the entire community. "Thank you all for coming," Sam began, his voice steady but charged with passion. "I know that this isn't an easy thing to process. What we've uncovered about Robert Miller isn't just shocking, it's heartbreaking. But we cannot let his lies stand. We cannot let him manipulate us any longer. This is our community, and we have the power to make it right." There were some murmurs of agreement, some nods of approval. But there were still skeptics, people who questioned the validity of the story or feared the consequences of taking down someone with Robert's connections. "I get it," Sam continued, sensing the uncertainty in the room. "You're afraid. You don't want to lose what we've built here. But we're not fighting just for ourselves. We're fighting for this town, for the future of our families, our homes, our neighborhood. Robert Miller has been exploiting us all for far too long, and we can't let him keep getting away with it. This is our chance to take back control. We need to stand together." The room was silent for a moment, but then a voice called out from the back. "Sam's right. We can't let him get away with this." It was Doug Williams, the man who had been one of the first to support them after the HOA meeting. His words seemed to spark something in the crowd. Slowly, more people started speaking up, expressing their support, their anger, their determination. "I'm with you," another voice called. "We've had enough." Sam smiled, feeling the tide begin to turn. But he knew this was only the beginning. The real battle was just beginning, and they had to keep pushing forward, no matter the cost. As they left the community center, Sam's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Hannah. "It's gone viral. You're going to have the whole town asking questions now. Keep your head on straight. We're not done yet." The fight was far from over. But Sam couldn't help but feel that the momentum was starting to shift in their favor. By the time the sun set on Lakeview Heights, it was clear that the fight had just begun. The release of the article had done what Sam and Emily had hoped, it had shaken the town awake. But the backlash was coming in faster than they could have imagined. Robert Miller was not a man who would quietly accept defeat, especially not in the face of his carefully constructed empire. He had wealth, connections, and influence that extended far beyond the small town of Lakeview Heights. He wasn't about to let a few revelations about his shady dealings unravel everything he had worked for. And so, as Sam and Emily stood outside their house, discussing their next move, the first signs of his counterattack began to appear. It started with phone calls. Late into the night, as Sam and Emily sat at the kitchen table, going over the next steps of their plan, their phones rang incessantly. Some were from concerned neighbors, others from friends and family who had heard the rumors and wanted to know what was going on. But then came the messages, the ones from people they hadn't heard from in years. "Sam, you need to back off. Robert's a good guy. You're going to destroy the whole neighborhood. Emily, I heard about the article. Are you sure about all this? Robert's a lot more powerful than you think." The comments were polite, but the tone was unmistakable: doubt. People were scared. They didn't know whether to believe the allegations or to trust the man they had known for years. And Robert had played the long game, building relationships, showing up at neighborhood parties, and always presenting himself as the protector of the community. Now, as his empire began to tremble, it was clear he had a lot of people who would stand by him, no matter what. "I knew this was coming," Emily muttered, shaking her head. "It's not just the press we have to worry about. It's the people here. Robert has planted roots, and we're trying to pull them out by the base." Sam rubbed his temples. The weight of the situation was starting to take its toll. But he couldn't back down now. Not after everything they had uncovered. "We need to push harder. If Robert is going to play dirty, we have to be ready." The next morning, they woke to find that Robert had done more than just make a statement. He had launched a full-scale counteroffensive. The first blow came when a group of residents, many of whom had supported Robert for years, started to organize. They weren't just defending Robert, they were attacking Sam and Emily directly. Flyers were posted on every street corner, each one declaring that the allegations against Robert Miller were false and accusing Sam and Emily of slandering a respected member of the community. The flyers were slick, professionally designed, and full of one key message: don't let these outsiders tear our neighborhood apart. Then came the phone calls. Not just a few, but dozens. Some anonymous, some from familiar voices. And the messages on social media flooded in too: accusations, threats, questions of loyalty. A carefully constructed web of doubt was beginning to envelop Lakeview Heights. Robert Miller had spent years creating a network of support, and now it was time for him to cash in on it. But Robert wasn't just relying on public opinion. Sam and Emily quickly realized that his reach extended much further. It didn't take long for them to hear about the next phase of Robert's attack, a legal one. A letter arrived at their doorstep that afternoon. It was from Robert's attorney, demanding that Sam and Emily retract the allegations made in the article and apologize for what had been written. The letter was formal, cold, and threatening, outlining the consequences if they refused to comply. Lawsuits, defamation claims, and even criminal charges were mentioned. It was clear, Robert was not going to let this go without a fight. Emily looked at Sam, the letter in her hand, her face pale. "This is serious, Sam. He's using the law against us now." Sam's mind raced as he took the letter from her. He knew this was coming. Robert had too much at stake to let his reputation be tarnished by a small-town exposé. But the threat of legal action added a new layer of pressure. They couldn't afford to lose in court, especially with the media watching. If Robert's legal team could twist the narrative and make them look like the villains, they would lose everything. "I won't back down," Sam said, his voice firm. "But we need to fight this smart. We can't afford to make any mistakes. We need to talk to our lawyer. And we need to get ahead of this." They reached out to a local attorney, someone they had trusted in the past for minor legal matters. When they explained the situation, he was as shocked as they were, but he knew exactly what they were up against. He advised them not to make any public statements just yet and to focus on gathering more support from the community. Support that would prove their claims and ensure that they weren't alone in this fight. The more people you have on your side, the harder it will be for Robert to silence you," the attorney said, his tone serious. "And I'd suggest you start preparing for a long battle. This is going to get ugly." As the days passed, Sam and Emily found themselves entrenched in a battle they hadn't expected. They had the evidence, but the community was divided. Robert's supporters were vocal, organized, and well-funded. They didn't just believe in him, they wanted to believe in him. He had woven himself into the very fabric of their lives. Some of their neighbors were now questioning their loyalty, wondering if they had been too quick to trust Sam and Emily. Had they been naive to believe that someone so trusted could be capable of such betrayal? The stress of the situation was beginning to wear on Sam. Emily, too, was feeling the weight. It was hard to go about their normal lives when every conversation felt like a confrontation. Every friendly face could be hiding someone who was secretly supporting Robert, or worse, someone who had turned against them. Every time they went out into town, the stares followed them. The emotional toll was just as exhausting as the legal and public battles. Yet through it all, Emily remained determined. "We knew it wouldn't be easy," she told Sam one evening as they sat down for dinner, the tension of the day finally catching up with them. "But we can't stop now. We've come too far." Sam nodded. "I know. I won't give up. Not now." But deep down, a part of him wondered how much more they could take before everything came crashing down. The war of words continued to rage. Robert's supporters grew bolder, and their tactics grew more aggressive. They spread rumors, launched smear campaigns, and even went so far as to intimidate those who were speaking out in Sam and Emily's favor. It wasn't just the battle for truth anymore, it was a fight for control, a fight for power over the future of Lakeview Heights. And in the midst of it all, Sam and Emily had to figure out how to stay one step ahead. They were in this fight now, and there was no turning back. Lakeview Heights was no longer the quiet, peaceful neighborhood it had once been. What had started as a quiet dispute between neighbors had escalated into an all-out war. The lines were drawn, and Sam and Emily found themselves standing on one side, with Robert Miller and his supporters on the other. The pressure was mounting from all sides, but there was one thing Sam knew for sure: this wasn't just about him and Emily anymore. This was about the entire community, their homes, and their future. It wasn't just the legal threats, the smear campaigns, or the flyers plastered all over town that had Sam worried. It was the palpable tension in the air, the whispers in every corner, and the look in his neighbors' eyes. Some of them looked at him like he was the enemy, like he was the one who had set this whole thing in motion. Others were afraid to take a side, unsure of who they could trust. They had always known Robert Miller as the community leader, the man who knew everyone's name and made sure that everything ran smoothly, at least, on the surface. But now, the cracks were showing. The question was, would they be able to break through before Robert's grip on the community became too tight? The first step was finding their allies. Sam and Emily had known from the start that they couldn't fight this battle alone. So, they began reaching out to everyone they could think of. People they knew were disgruntled with the HOA, residents who had experienced firsthand the unfair treatment and shady dealings that Robert had orchestrated over the years. They started small, speaking to people one-on-one, gently probing to see where they stood. Slowly but surely, their group began to grow. Doug Williams, who had been one of the first to publicly speak out, was among the first to join their growing alliance. He was a former military man, disciplined, quiet, and reliable. He had lived in Lakeview Heights for over 20 years and knew the neighborhood like the back of his hand. Doug was the kind of person people listened to, and having him on their side was a game-changer. The next was Sarah Mitchell, a single mother who had been fighting the HOA's increasing fees and unfair treatment for years. She had been marginalized, ignored, and pushed aside by the very people who should have been representing her interests. Sarah was fierce, with a no-nonsense attitude that made her an invaluable ally. Her support also brought with it the support of other parents who were fed up with Robert's control over the neighborhood. As word spread, more people began to show up, people who had been silently frustrated with the way things were run but had never felt like they had the power to speak out. Now, with Sam and Emily at the forefront, they were finding the courage to stand up for what was right. One chilly evening, Sam and Emily gathered their growing group of supporters at Doug's house. They sat in the living room, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Doug's wife, Carla, had set out coffee and snacks, and the group exchanged knowing glances as they sat down around the room. "We need to figure out our next move," Sam began, standing at the front of the room. "Robert's not going to let up, and we've already seen what he's willing to do to silence us. We can't just keep waiting for the next attack." Doug nodded, his arms crossed. "We need to hit him where it hurts. If we keep playing by his rules, we'll lose. We need to change the game." "I agree," Emily added, her voice steady despite the weight of everything they were facing. "But we also have to be smart. We need to make sure we have the evidence, the support, and the momentum to fight back, especially if he decides to bring the legal hammer down." The room fell silent as everyone considered the gravity of the situation. Then, Sarah spoke up. "I think we need to go public. Get everyone on our side," she said, her voice firm. "The more people who know about what's really going on, the harder it's going to be for Robert to cover up his tracks. But we can't do it half-heartedly. We need to expose everything, every document, every shady deal, every lie." The room murmured in agreement. "We've been sitting on a goldmine of evidence," Doug said, his voice low. "But we need to make sure it's airtight. If we go public with this, Robert will have every lawyer in the state trying to tear us apart. We're not just exposing him, we're exposing the system he's built," Emily said, her tone resolute. "This isn't just about Robert. This is about making sure this never happens again, not just in Lakeview Heights, but anywhere." Sam felt a surge of determination. He could see the resolve in their eyes. They were no longer just fighting for their homes, they were fighting for something bigger. They were fighting for the future of their community. The following week was a whirlwind. With the help of their growing network of supporters, Sam and Emily began organizing their evidence. They spent hours in the local library, scanning documents, digging through public records, and pulling together everything they could find that would expose Robert's corruption. They found evidence of secret meetings, fraudulent contracts, and even hidden accounts that funneled money into Robert's pockets. But there was still one big hurdle: Robert's connections. He had friends in high places, both within the HOA and in local government. His influence extended far beyond Lakeview Heights, and if they were going to take him down, they needed more than just documents, they needed undeniable proof. That's when Doug made an unexpected suggestion. "We should bring in someone from the outside," he said one evening as they met to discuss their strategy. "Someone who can audit all the financial records and make sure everything is above board. A professional." At first, Emily was hesitant. "We don't have the resources for that. Robert's got deep pockets." "I know someone," Doug said, a glint of determination in his eyes. "I served with him in the military. He's a forensic accountant, does this kind of thing all the time. He owes me a favor." Sam looked at Emily, then at the rest of the group. This was the break they needed. "Let's do it," Sam said. "We don't have much time. We need to get that proof." The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and organizing. Doug's contact, a man named Ben Carter, agreed to help them and arrived in Lakeview Heights on a Thursday afternoon. Ben was an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a military precision to his movements. His background as a forensic accountant made him the perfect person to dive into the financial records and uncover the full extent of Robert's corruption. Within a week, Ben had uncovered a staggering amount of evidence. Hidden bank accounts, overinflated invoices, and kickbacks that were funneled directly into Robert's personal accounts. The scope of the fraud was far worse than they had anticipated. "Robert's been at this for years," Ben said, shaking his head in disbelief. "The amount of money he's siphoned off from the community is astronomical. This isn't just about power, it's about greed. With Ben's findings in hand, Sam and Emily knew they had the ammunition they needed. They had the financial proof, the documents, and now, they had the support of their community behind them. It was time to take the fight to the next level. The storm was building, and Sam could feel it. This wasn't just about taking down one man, it was about restoring justice, not just for Lakeview Heights, but for every community that had been manipulated and taken advantage of. With the evidence in hand, they were ready for whatever Robert threw at them next. They were no longer fighting alone. The days leading up to the public unveiling of the evidence were filled with both excitement and dread. Sam and Emily had spent weeks preparing, gathering support, and building a solid case against Robert Miller. Now, it was time to go public. It was no longer just about defending their own homes, it was about exposing the truth and showing the world the extent of Robert's manipulation. But with everything they had learned, Sam and Emily knew they weren't just fighting for their neighborhood anymore, they were fighting for justice itself. And as they prepared to release the findings, the stakes had never been higher. The morning of the release felt like a weight on Sam's chest. They had spent hours, days, even weeks preparing the evidence for the moment when they would step into the spotlight. The strategy was simple: they would hold a press conference in the town square, inviting local news outlets and any community members who wanted to attend. It would be there, in front of the people who had been manipulated by Robert for so long, that the truth would finally be revealed. The press conference was scheduled for 11 a.m., and by 10:30, a small crowd had already gathered outside the town hall. Sam and Emily stood in front of a long table, their hearts pounding in their chests. They could see the reporters setting up their cameras, their notebooks out, ready to capture every word that would follow. The atmosphere was thick with tension. "Are you ready?" Emily asked quietly, her eyes meeting Sam's. They were standing side by side, holding hands for support. Sam exhaled slowly. "We have to be. This is it." Emily nodded, her expression firm. "We've come this far. We can't turn back now." As the clock struck 11, Sam stepped up to the microphone. The crowd fell silent, and all eyes turned to him. It was his turn to speak, to take the first step into the unknown, to bring everything they had uncovered into the light. "Thank you all for being here today," Sam began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of everything they had been through. "Today is about something bigger than just the two of us. It's about the truth. It's about justice. And it's about ensuring that the power of our community is never again used to manipulate, deceive, and control us." There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd, and Sam continued. "Over the last several months, we've gathered evidence, met with our neighbors, and uncovered a web of lies and corruption that has been woven into the very fabric of Lakeview Heights. Our goal today is to show you the truth. To show you what Robert Miller has been hiding from all of us." He nodded to Emily, who stepped forward, holding up a binder full of documents. She handed it to the reporter closest to the stage, who immediately began flipping through the pages. "Inside this binder," Emily said, "you'll find everything we've uncovered. Financial records, internal emails, hidden accounts, all of it. What we've learned is far worse than we could have imagined. Robert Miller has been using his influence to steal from the very people he claims to protect." Sam paused for a moment, allowing the weight of the statement to sink in. As they began to reveal the documents, the reactions from the crowd were mixed. Some were shocked, their faces a mixture of disbelief and outrage. Others appeared uncomfortable, unsure of whether they should believe what was being said. The reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, and the cameras clicked away, capturing every word, every piece of evidence. Then came the bombshell. "We found proof," Emily said, her voice unwavering, "that Robert Miller has been diverting funds from the Homeowners Association into his personal accounts. These funds were meant to maintain the common areas of Lakeview Heights, to improve the infrastructure, and to keep this community safe. Instead, they've lined his pockets." There was a collective gasp from the crowd. Sam saw several people in the front row glance at each other, whispering in disbelief. Some of them were clearly trying to process the magnitude of what was being revealed. Others were already looking at each other, as if they had been waiting for someone to finally speak the truth. Sam and Emily continued to lay out the evidence, piece by piece. They showed how Robert had manipulated financial reports, hidden expenses, and funneled money into shell companies that he secretly controlled. They exposed the illegal contracts he had signed with businesses he owned, and they even revealed a series of emails in which Robert discussed ways to cover up the scheme and silence anyone who might get in his way. But the most damning piece of all came when they revealed a private email between Robert and a local councilman, where they discussed the illegal manipulation of zoning laws to ensure that Robert could profit off of real estate developments in the area. This wasn't just a neighborhood HOA scheme, Sam said, his voice thick with conviction. This was a carefully planned operation to take control of the community, to manipulate zoning laws for personal gain, and to enrich himself at the expense of everyone who trusted him. The crowd was silent now. The shock of the revelations hung heavy in the air. Some of the people in the crowd began murmuring to each other, while others stood frozen, unable to process what they were hearing. The reporters were still furiously taking notes, and Sam could feel the eyes of every person in the crowd on him, their judgment and disbelief palpable. But as Sam looked out over the crowd, he noticed something unexpected. There were people nodding. Doug was standing at the back, a quiet but supportive presence. Sarah and the other parents stood nearby, their faces resolute. They had been there from the beginning, and now, their hard work was paying off. The tide was turning. It didn't take long before Robert's supporters began to speak up. "Are you saying this is all a lie?" a voice called from the crowd. "No," Emily replied, her voice steady. "We're saying the truth has been hidden. And today, we're showing you the truth." Another voice, louder now, shouted, "This is slander. You can't just ruin someone's reputation based on a few documents." Sam stepped forward. "We're not here to ruin anyone's reputation. We're here to expose a man who has been stealing from this community for years. A man who's used his influence to manipulate every person in this town for his own benefit." The murmur in the crowd grew louder. More people were beginning to speak up in support of Sam and Emily, their voices joining in a chorus of anger and disbelief. Some of Robert's supporters were growing defensive, but Sam could see the shift happening. The truth was out. The lies couldn't stand up to the weight of the evidence. Within hours, the story hit local news, and it spread like wildfire across the community. Social media exploded with reactions, some in support of Sam and Emily, others defending Robert. But the truth was undeniable, and as the days passed, more people began to stand up and speak out. Robert Miller's empire was crumbling, piece by piece. And while Sam and Emily knew there would be more challenges ahead, they also knew this was just the beginning of the end. By the end of the day, they had won the first battle. The fight was far from over, but the people of Lakeview Heights had seen the truth. And for the first time in a long time, they felt empowered. The storm had begun, and Robert Miller would never be the same again. The days following the public unveiling of Robert Miller's corruption were a whirlwind of emotions, media attention, and pressure. Sam and Emily had achieved what they set out to do. They had exposed Robert for the manipulative, greedy man he truly was. But as they both knew, this was far from the end of the journey. The real battle was only just beginning. Sam couldn't shake the feeling that Robert wasn't going down without a fight. Robert was a man of power, of influence, and he wasn't going to let his empire crumble easily. But Sam had learned something important over the past few months. Robert could control the narrative, manipulate people, and even threaten those who crossed him, but he could not control the truth. And that was something Robert could never take back. The courtroom was packed the day of the trial. Sam and Emily sat in the front row, flanked by Doug, Sarah, and their other supporters. Robert Miller's side of the room was equally full, with his lawyer standing tall, confident, and ready to fight. The tension in the air was thick, everyone knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about Lakeview Heights anymore. This was about justice, about holding someone accountable for their actions, no matter how powerful they were. The judge, a woman named Judge Patterson, called the court to order, and the room quieted down immediately. Sam could feel his heart beating in his chest. He had prepared for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare him for the weight of what was about to unfold. Robert Miller stood in the dock, his back straight, his suit pressed, and his demeanor as composed as ever. But Sam saw the cracks in his armor. Robert wasn't as calm as he wanted everyone to believe. His eyes darted nervously around the room, and his jaw clenched whenever someone on the opposing side spoke. He had no choice but to maintain his arrogance, but Sam could tell. Deep down, Robert knew he was cornered. The trial began with opening statements from both sides. Robert's lawyer, a slick and experienced attorney named Michael Daniels, launched into a defense strategy that sought to undermine the credibility of the evidence. He claimed that the documents were fabricated, that the witnesses were biased, and that the entire case was a baseless attack on Robert's character. But Sam wasn't intimidated. Emily wasn't intimidated. They had the truth on their side, and that was all that mattered. Emily was the first to take the stand. She sat tall, calm, and composed, her testimony powerful and unwavering. She spoke about the evidence they had gathered, the months of research, and the countless hours spent piecing together the truth. She described in detail the fraudulent financial records, the hidden accounts, and the illegal contracts Robert had forged. She even spoke about the emotional toll it had taken on her and Sam, how the fight to expose Robert's corruption had affected their relationship, their friends, and their home. Her voice cracked slightly when she spoke about the sleepless nights and the constant fear that they would lose everything. But Emily stood strong, her courage an inspiration to everyone in the room. And when she finished her testimony, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the members of the jury who had initially seemed skeptical were now on their side. Next, it was Sam's turn to take the stand. His hands were sweaty, his pulse racing, but he knew this was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He had lived through everything that had led them to this point, and now, he would make sure the world knew the truth. He spoke about his first encounter with Robert Miller, the subtle manipulation, the promises of a better future, the way Robert made him feel like part of something special. But Sam also spoke about the moment when everything changed. The moment he realized that Robert wasn't a leader, he was a fraud. Sam didn't just talk about the evidence. He talked about the people of Lakeview Heights, his neighbors, his friends, who had been betrayed by Robert's actions. He spoke about how Robert had used the HOA as a tool for control, how he had bullied, lied to, and cheated the people who trusted him. Sam made it clear that Robert's actions had hurt far more than just a few people, they had torn apart a community. When Sam finished, the courtroom was silent. The impact of his words hung in the air, and even Robert's lawyer, Michael Daniels, was momentarily speechless. The defense side didn't have much to counteract that kind of raw, emotional testimony. The next few days were filled with the testimony of other witnesses. Doug, Sarah, and a few other residents of Lakeview Heights, all sharing their experiences with Robert and the corruption that had infiltrated their neighborhood. One by one, each person added another layer of truth to the story, and with each new testimony, Robert's defense grew weaker. Finally, it was time for Robert to take the stand. The man who had been so composed throughout the trial now looked visibly shaken. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the desperation that had been hiding beneath the surface. Sam watched as Robert tried to defend himself, trying to deny the mounting evidence, attempting to cast doubt on the witnesses. But his words were hollow. His arguments didn't stand up to scrutiny. And as the jury listened intently, it became clear to everyone that Robert was losing control. He even tried to accuse Sam and Emily of fabricating the evidence, claiming they were motivated by greed or revenge. But no one bought it. The witnesses, the documents, the evidence, it was all too strong. Robert's lies couldn't cover the truth anymore. The closing arguments were brief, but powerful. Sam's attorney painted a picture of a man who had used his power to manipulate and steal from the people who trusted him. Robert's lawyer tried to paint Sam and Emily as disgruntled homeowners seeking revenge, but it was too late. The truth had already been exposed, and it was undeniable. The jury deliberated for just under 2 hours before returning with a verdict. Guilty. Sam and Emily sat together, their hands tightly clasped. They had done it. Robert Miller had been found guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and corruption. His actions had torn apart the community they loved, but in the end, justice had prevailed. The news spread quickly. Lakeview Heights was changing. Robert Miller's reign of control was over, and the community was free to rebuild. The HOA was reformed, new leaders emerged, and slowly, Lakeview Heights began to heal. Weeks later, Sam and Emily stood on the dock by the lake, the place where it had all started. The water was calm, and the sunset bathed the lake in golden light. For the first time in a long time, Sam felt at peace. They had lost so much along the way: friends, trust, time. But they had gained something far more important: the truth, the strength to fight for what was right, and the realization that their community was stronger than ever before. "Do you think Robert will ever come back?" Emily asked, her voice soft. "No," Sam replied, his voice calm but firm. "This place is ours now. We won't let anyone take it from us again." They stood together in silence, watching the water ripple gently in the evening breeze. They had won. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt right. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?